What would you do if you were sent into the sky with just one wingman to face 60 enemy fighters, knowing your fuel might not even get you home? On October 24th, 1944. For one American pilot lived that nightmare, and what happened next became one of the most unbelievable dogfights in history, ending with his engine dying the exact second he landed. Today we bring you a story so intense, so unbelievable, it sounds almost impossible. At 7:30 October 24th, 1944, Commander David McCampbell swung himself into the cockpit of his F6F Hellcat on the deck of the USS Essex. The morning air was already tense. Then movement. A radar operator came sprinting across the flight deck, fast, urgent, no hesitation. This wasn't routine. This was bad. Very bad. McCampbell was 34 years old with 25 confirmed kills, the commander of Air Group 15, a man who had already seen too much war. But nothing like this. 60 aircraft inbound, fighters, dive bombers, all heading straight for the American carrier force east of the Philippines. 60. Minutes earlier, he had been in the ready room when the alarm shattered the silence. Now the war had found him again. The Battle of Leyte Gulf Day 1. The largest naval battle in modern history was unfolding across hundreds of miles of ocean, and right now it was coming straight for them. Every available American aircraft was already airborne, being refueled or too far away to help. On the deck of the Essex, only 7 Hellcats were ready, 7 against 60. The math didn't lie, and it wasn't kind. Standard doctrine called for a 3-to-1 advantage for the attacker. The Japanese didn't just have that. They had nearly 9-to-1 odds. McCampbell didn't need a briefing to understand what that meant. He had been losing men for months. 11 pilots gone in just 3 months. Not numbers, names, faces, voices. Lieutenant Morrison shot down over Formosa. Ensign Caldwell killed during the Manila strikes. Lieutenant Commander Harris missing after Taiwan. Gone, all of them. And McCampbell had written the letters. Every single one. Now the Japanese were coming again, throwing everything they had left, while the Americans were running out of experienced pilots to stop them. The Essex was exposed. The other carriers of Task Group 38.3 had already launched their patrols, but they were stretched thin across 60 miles of ocean. Too much space, not enough planes. McCampbell glanced down at his fuel gauge. Half full. Not enough time to top off. Not enough time for anything. Enemy formation 22 miles out. Closing fast. 200 knots. He did the math instantly. 6 minutes. That's all he had. 6 minutes before those bombers were in range. 6 minutes before flight decks turned into fire. His Hellcat was armed 6 .50 caliber Browning machine guns, 400 rounds each, 2,400 rounds total, enough to fight, not enough to waste. The Pratt and Whitney R2800 engine roared to life beneath him, 2,000 horsepower, shaking the aircraft alive and hungry. He looked across the deck, one Hellcat spinning up, then another. Lieutenant Rushing, Lieutenant Hayes, Lieutenant Johnson. 3 more pilots being rushed into position as ground crews moved with desperate speed. 7 planes, 7 men. Against 60, McCampbell tightened his grip on the controls. He was the Air Group commander. The decision was his. Send all 7 fighters straight into the formation. Hit hard, hit fast. Try to break them before they reach the fleet. Or split the force cover. More angles, take more risks. The manual was clear. Never divide your fighters when outnumbered. But the manual was written for situations that made sense. This wasn't one of them. The ocean stretched endlessly ahead. Somewhere out there, 60 enemy aircraft were coming fast, relentless, unstoppable. McCampbell took a slow breath. 6 minutes, 7 fighters. One decision, and no room for mistakes. If you were sitting in McCampbell's cockpit with the engine roaring beneath you, 6 minutes on the clock, 7 fighters at your back, and 60 enemy aircraft closing fast, would you charge straight in or risk everything on a split-second gamble? Tell me your choice in the comments, and if you want to see how this impossible moment turns into one of the most legendary air battles of World War II, hit like and subscribe. Back to McCampbell, the Japanese formation appeared on radar 60, contacts 40 fighters flying loose escort around 20 dive bombers. The bombers were the real threat. One bomb through the flight deck of the Essex could kill hundreds of men and cripple American air operations for months. But the fighters were the shield. Any Hellcat that went for the bombers first would be torn apart before getting close. McCampbell made his decision in seconds, just as his plane captain pulled the wheel chocks. He pointed at 5 pilots, then toward the southern quadrant, go for the bombers. Then he tapped his own chest and looked at rushing. The 2 of them would take the fighters. 2 Hellcats against 40 Zeros and Oscars. He released the brakes and pushed the throttle forward. The Hellcat surged down the deck and lifted into the humid air above the Philippine Sea. 30 seconds later, rushing followed. They climbed hard, 3,000 feet, 6,000, 10,000. The enemy was 15 miles ahead and slightly below. McCampbell could see them now, dark specks against the blue water. 60 enemy aircraft, 2 American fighters. He armed his guns and checked his fuel again. Half tanks, maybe 90 minutes if he was careful. No room for error. He climbed higher, 15,000, 20,000 feet. Altitude meant speed. Speed meant survival. Below them, 12,000 feet down. The Japanese formation held steady, still driving toward the American carriers. Rushing slid into position 500 yards behind and to the right. Perfect spacing. A standard 2-plane element. They had practiced this again and again. 1 leader, 1 wingman attack, from altitude strike fast, then climb away. Below, the Japanese fighters circled their bombers, mostly Mitsubishi A6M0s, fast agile, deadly in a turn. McCampbell knew their strengths. At low altitude, they could outturn a Hellcat and outclimb it below 14,000 feet. But up here, the advantage shifted. The Hellcat was heavier, 2,000 pounds heavier, and in a dive that weight turned into speed. Speed became power. Power became lethal. McCampbell rolled into a 60-degree dive. The airspeed climbed 300 knots, 350, 400. The formation grew rapidly in his sights. He picked his target a 0, trailing slightly behind the group. Always the straggler. Always the weakest link. He centered it in his gun sight. 800 yards, 600, 400. The 0 pilot never looked up. McCampbell fired. 6.5 0 caliber machine guns roared. Tracers ripped through the sky. The 0's wing disintegrated and the aircraft rolled into a deadly spiral toward the ocean far below. First kill. He pulled up hard. 4 Gs crushed him into the seat. The Hellcat groaned but held. Back to altitude. Rushing was already there. His wingman had struck 2. Another 0 destroyed. 2 down, 58 remaining. The Japanese formation shattered. Fighters scattered in every direction, diving, climbing, breaking apart. Their cohesion vanished in seconds. McCampbell chose his next target, a Zero climbing up toward him. A fatal mistake. At this altitude, the Hellcat had the advantage. He dove again. Same pattern, same result. The Zero exploded into flame fuel, igniting ammunition, detonating in violent bursts. No parachute. Second kill. Then the fight became rhythm. Dive, fire, climb, repeat. McCampbell moved through the formation with precision. Third kill at 07:52. Fourth at 07:56. Between passes, he checked his fuel. The needle was dropping fast. Climbing burned fuel. The main tank dropped to 1/4. He switched to the auxiliary tank. Rushing stayed tight, firing short controlled bursts, disciplined, efficient. At 08:03, McCampbell claimed his fifth kill, a Nakajima Ki 43 Oscar, an Army fighter. Lighter, weaker, barely able to withstand the Hellcat's firepower. It came apart almost instantly. The Japanese were mixing Navy and Army aircraft, now clear signs of desperation. McCampbell lost track of time. Dive, fire, climb. His shoulder ached under the constant G-forces. Sweat soaked his flight suit despite the freezing air at 20,000 feet. The guns were heating up. He could smell cordite through his oxygen mask. Sixth kill, seventh. Below him, the formation was gone. No structure, no coordination. Just scattered aircraft fleeing west toward Luzon. And McCampbell was still hunting. McCampbell glanced down at his ammunition counter, less than 400 rounds left. He had started with 2,400. In just 30 minutes, he had burned through over 2,000 rounds. Rushing's Hellcat slid up beside him. His wingman signaled, tapping his guns, then dragging a hand across his throat. Empty. Completely dry. No ammunition left. McCampbell understood instantly. Now came the decision. The smart move was to escort Rushing back to the Essex. Get him out. But the sky was still alive with enemy fighters, still a threat to the carriers, and McCampbell still had rounds left. Not many, but enough for maybe 2 more passes. He looked at Rushing, then pointed down toward another group of Zeros. Rushing nodded. No hesitation, no weapons, but still in the fight. They rolled into another dive together. 2 Hellcats, one armed, one empty. But to the enemy, they looked exactly the same. McCampbell selected his next target, a Zero climbing in a tight turn. This pilot was experienced. He spotted them early and reversed into a head-on merge, trying to force a turning fight where the lighter Zero had the advantage. McCampbell had seen it before Coral Sea, midway the Marianas. He didn't take the bait. Instead, he rolled inverted and pulled through. Negative G slammed him into his straps. Blood rushed to his head, vision narrowing. He completed the maneuver and came out directly behind the Zero. Perfect angle. 300 yards. He fired a short controlled burst, maybe 50 rounds. The Zero's cockpit shattered instantly. Plexiglass and metal exploded outward. The aircraft snapped sideways and dropped lifeless, spiraling down toward the ocean. 8th kill. Just one more to make history. McCampbell pulled back into a climb, but something felt wrong. The Hellcat was sluggish, heavy. The engine coughed, cylinder head temperature climbing into the red. He had been at full throttle for over 40 minutes. Even the rugged R2800 had limits, especially in the tropical heat at 20,000 feet. Then he saw it. 0840. A lone Zero heading west, running. The pilot had had enough. McCampbell rolled into his final dive. The Zero pilot spotted him and pushed down, trying to escape. The wrong move. Nothing the Japanese had could outdive a Hellcat. McCampbell closed fast 400 yards, 300, 200. He placed the gun sight on the engine cowling and squeezed the trigger. His last burst. Tracers walked up the fuselage. The engine seized. Black smoke poured out. The Zero pitched forward into a steep dive and vanished into the clouds below. 9th kill. 9 enemy aircraft destroyed in 90 minutes. A single mission record, one no other Navy pilot would match during the war. For the first time since takeoff, McCampbell reached for his radio. He keyed the mic and called the Essex, his voice calm, almost unreal after what had just happened. 9 confirmed kills. Silence. Then the radio operator came back unsure. Say again. McCampbell didn't hesitate. 9 confirmed. Where are you watching this from? Right now, are you in the United States, Vietnam, the UK, Australia, Canada, or somewhere else? Drop your country and city in the comments. I read them all, and I'd love to see how far this story of McCampbell has reached across the world. He checked his fuel gauge, and for the first time that morning, David McCampbell felt a cold wave of fear. The main tank was empty, completely dry. The auxiliary barely showed an eighth. Maybe 20 gallons left. Maybe 30 minutes of flight time if he pulled the engine back and treated it gently. He looked up. To the west, the coastline of Luzon stretched across the horizon. That was where the Japanese were running. And that's when it hit him. He had chased them too far. Nearly 100 miles from the fleet. 100 miles out. 30 minutes of fuel. The math didn't work. He eased the throttle back to 1,800 revolutions per minute. The Hellcat shuddered, the powerful engine now forced into restraint after nearly an hour of full combat power, but it held barely. Rushing slid up beside him, signaling, pointing at his fuel gauge, then shaking his head. Empty. Both of them were now flying on fumes. McCampbell turned east immediately. No more fighting. Now it was about getting home. He held his altitude carefully. Every 1,000 feet meant about 2 miles of glide. He was at 18,000 feet, maybe 36 miles if the engine quit. He needed 60. Behind them, the Philippine coast faded into haze. Ahead, nothing but open ocean. Deep, cold water. Deadly water. He leaned the mixture, squeezing every last drop from the system. The needle touched empty. The engine coughed once, then again the aircraft shuddering violently before somehow stabilizing. It was running on vapor now, on whatever fuel remained in the lines. Then he saw it, the fleet. Tiny, gray shapes on the horizon, still 60 miles away. The engine coughed again at 50 miles. McCampbell switched tanks, nothing. Both tanks were dry. The engine note changed immediately. Rough, uneven, missing cylinders. The Hellcat was dying. He glanced left. Rushing was still there, but his aircraft looked worse. A thin white trail of vapor streaming behind him. His engine was breaking down faster. Too much strain. Too much time at full throttle. McCampbell dropped through 10,000 feet. Still 40 miles to go. Now the fleet was clearly visible carriers in formation surrounded by cruisers and destroyers, white wakes cutting through the ocean. So close and still so far. He pushed the nose down further. 8,000 feet, 7,000. Trading altitude for distance. Every second mattered. Then an explosion. A black puff of smoke burst ahead of him. Then another, American anti-aircraft fire. McCampbell's stomach dropped. The destroyers had picked them up, 2 aircraft approaching from the west from Japanese territory. To them, These weren't friendly fighters, they were threats. His IFF should have identified him, but systems failed, signals got lost. Another shell burst closer, 100 yards. They were firing to kill. McCampbell reacted instantly. He shoved the stick forward and dove hard. The Hellcat plunged toward the ocean. Rushing followed. Both aircraft dropped fast, slicing through the air, losing thousands of feet in seconds. The heavy flak stopped, but McCampbell knew what came next. He had seen it before. The destroyers would report them unknown aircraft, wrong direction, and soon American fighters would be coming. This time, there would be no hesitation, and he had almost no fuel left to survive it. 4 Hellcats appeared at 2,000 feet, diving straight toward him, American fighters from VF-19 USS Lexington. They came in fast, tight, unmistakably hostile. McCampbell had no way to identify himself. His radio was locked on the Essex frequency, and he couldn't risk taking his hands off the controls. The distance closed fast, 1,000 yards, 800, 600. He could see their gun ports. The lead pilot was lining up the shot. McCampbell broke hard left. 4 Gs slammed into him. The engine coughed violently, nearly dying. The American fighter stayed with him, forcing him down toward the water. Off to his side, Rushing was in the same nightmare, 4 more Hellcats chasing him. 8 American fighters hunting 2 of their own. McCampbell's engine was barely alive, coughing constantly. He was 3 miles from the Essex, close enough to see aircraft on the deck. So close and still not safe. The fighters behind him closed to 400 yards, 300, then suddenly the lead fighter broke off. No warning, no explanation. One by one, the others peeled away. Rushing's pursuers did the same. The danger vanished as quickly as it came. Then the engine quit. 2 miles from the Essex. Complete power loss. The propeller spun uselessly. He was gliding now 120 knots, 1,000 feet of altitude. He did the math instantly. He wouldn't make it. Then he saw it, USS Langley off his right wing, smaller than the Essex, but her deck was clear. He turned toward her. No power, no second chance. The carrier steamed into the wind. He dropped to 800 feet 1 mile out, 700, 600. He lowered the landing gear, just enough hydraulic pressure left. He kept the flaps up to preserve glide. Committed. The Langley rushed toward him. The landing signal officer waved frantically, too fast, wrong angle, but McCampbell ignored it. There was no adjustment left. Only gravity. 500 feet. Half a mile. He was going to make it barely. The Hellcat crossed the stern at 50 feet. The LSO dove for cover as the gear cleared the deck edge by inches. Then impact. A hard, violent landing. The tail hook caught the number 3 wire. Perfect. The aircraft slammed to a stop in seconds. 8 Gs forward. At that exact moment, the engine died completely. Deck crew rushed in, but the tail hook wouldn't release, no hydraulic pressure. Sailors had to free it by hand, while McCampbell sat there, staring at a fuel gauge reading absolute 0. 30 seconds later, Rushing landed, catching the wire as his engine died on rollout. 2 Hellcats, both out of fuel, both barely holding together. Inspection confirmed it. McCampbell had fired 2,398 rounds out of 2,400, just 2 rounds left. Every fuel tank bone dry. The engine had been running on vapor in the final minutes. If he had tried to reach the Essex, he would have gone into the ocean short of the deck. The deck officer looked at him. 9 kills, 2 rounds, left 0 fuel. Forced landing on another carrier, nearly shot down by his own side. He had seen many pilots return from combat. This was different. McCampbell asked about the 5 pilots he had sent after the bombers. All had returned, 2 kills confirmed, no losses. The Japanese strike had been completely broken. The fleet was safe. McCampbell walked to the island and looked east. 4 miles away, the Essex was still launching aircraft, the battle still raging. And for a brief moment, he simply stood there, alive. Did anyone in your family serve in World War II? Maybe as a pilot, a sailor, a soldier, or even working behind the front lines? If so, share their name, where they served, or any story you've heard in the comments, because these stories deserve to be remembered and honored. October 24th, 1944 was only the beginning, the first day of the largest naval battle in history. Over the next 72 hours, 4 separate battles would erupt across the Philippine waters: Sibuyan Sea, Surigao, Strait Cape, Engaño, and Samar. More than 200,000 naval personnel. Fleets moving in every direction. The Imperial Japanese Navy was throwing everything it had into one final gamble: Operation Shogo, Victory Operation. Their last chance to stop the American advance toward the home islands. McCampbell's 9 kills had shattered the morning strike against Task Group 38.3. But the fight was far from over. On Luzon, Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi still commanded hundreds of aircraft Zeros, Val's Kates, Betty bombers. The morning attack had only been the opening move. 2 more waves would launch before sunset, 50 to 60 aircraft each. The American carriers would be under constant attack. On the deck of the USS Langley, a medical corpsman approached McCampbell. Standard procedure: pulse blood pressure, oxygen system check, questions about vision and dizziness. McCampbell passed. No injuries. But his hands were shaking. Adrenaline crash. Normal after 90 minutes of continuous combat. A deck officer handed him a message from the Essex: return immediately. A destroyer would transfer him back. McCampbell glanced at Rushing. His wingman sat on the wing of his Hellcat, exhausted. 24 years old, 6 kills that morning, 15 between them. More aircraft destroyed in one mission than many squadrons achieved in weeks. Rushing would earn the Navy Cross. But right now, he just looked drained. The transfer took 20 minutes through rough seas. The whaleboat rose and fell as it approached the towering side of the Essex. McCampbell grabbed the ladder and climbed up to the deck. An officer was waiting. No rest. He was needed in the intelligence center immediately. Deep inside the ship, the war covered every wall. Maps filled with red and blue markers. The Battle of Leyte Gulf unfolding in real time. McCampbell stepped closer. The Japanese center force under Admiral Kurita was pushing through the Sibuyan Sea, 5 battleships including Yamato and Musashi, with cruisers and destroyers heading for San Bernardino Strait. If they broke through, they would strike the landing beaches at Leyte. American aircraft had been attacking them all morning. The Musashi had already taken multiple torpedo and bomb hits, slowing listing, but still moving, still dangerous. Built like a fortress, massive armor, 72,000 tons. The situation was changing fast. To the south, another Japanese force was advancing through Surigao Strait, heading straight into an American battle line, waiting in the dark. That fight would come at night. Guns against guns. Battleship against battleship. But the real danger was to the north. Japanese carriers were drawing American forces away. Admiral Halsey had taken the fast carriers north to intercept, leaving fewer aircraft to defend Leyte. If Kurita broke through at the same time, the invasion could be exposed. An intelligence officer stepped in. Afternoon strike, 1400 hours. Maximum effort, every bomber, every torpedo plane. McCampbell would lead the fighter escort. His Hellcat was still on the Langley, damaged and out of fuel. A replacement aircraft was already being prepared. He had 90 minutes. 90 minutes to reset, brief, and go again. He walked into the ready room. 23 pilots were already there. Some had flown combat air patrol. Others had attacked the Japanese fleet. Lieutenant Commander Rigg had led the torpedo strike on the Musashi, 8 hits confirmed. The massive battleship was still afloat, still moving. The room quieted as McCampbell entered. The pilots looked at him differently now. They had heard the radio calls. They knew what had happened. 9 kills, 1 mission, in war kills, earned respect. But surviving the impossible, that was something else entirely. McCampbell had been flying combat for 7 relentless months. Since April 1944, when the USS Essex joined Task Force. 58 Air Group 15 had fought its way across the Pacific Marshall Islands, Truk Saipan, Guam, Tinian, Palau, Formosa, and now the Philippines. 6 months of non-stop war, more than 20,000 flight hours. In that time, his air group had destroyed over 300 enemy aircraft in the air and hundreds more on the ground, more than any other air group in the Pacific. McCampbell himself had already claimed 25 kills before this day even began. His previous best had come during the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944, the Marianas Turkey Shoot. The Japanese had launched hundreds of carrier aircraft. McCampbell shot down 7 in one day, becoming an ace in a day. And he did it twice, the only American pilot to achieve that. Now over the Philippines, he had destroyed 9 aircraft in just 90 minutes. A record that would stand for the rest of the war. No Navy pilot would ever surpass it. What he had done was the absolute limit. Perfect position, perfect timing, perfect execution, and just enough luck to survive. But the war wasn't slowing down. The intelligence officer continued the briefing. The Japanese center force was still advancing through the Sibuyan Sea. Admiral Kurita had already lost his flagship, the cruiser Atago, sunk by the submarine USS Darter. Now he commanded from the battleship Yamato, the largest battleship ever built. 9 18-inch guns, each shell weighing over 3,000 pounds. Nearby, her sister ship Musashi was still afloat, damaged but moving. Still a threat. The afternoon strike was set for 1,400 hours. 36 aircraft, 12 Hellcats, 12 dive bombers, 12 torpedo planes. McCampbell would lead the fighters. His mission was to suppress anti-aircraft fire while the bombers attacked. The most dangerous role. Japanese battleships were floating fortresses packed with anti-aircraft guns. The sky around them would be filled with flak. At 1,300 hours, McCampbell stepped back onto the flight deck. His replacement Hellcat aircraft number 47 was ready, fully fueled, guns loaded. The deck was alive with motion bombs being mounted, torpedoes secured, engines warming. He climbed into the cockpit and strapped in. The routine was automatic, but this mission felt different. 9 kills behind him, another battle ahead. At 13:55, the launch signal came. His Hellcat roared down the deck and lifted into the sky. One by one, the rest followed. 36 aircraft forming up above the Essex, then turning west toward the Sibian Sea, toward Musashi and Yamato, toward the heaviest anti-aircraft fire in the Japanese Navy. The strike was brutal. McCampbell led low strafing runs against the destroyers, forcing anti-aircraft crews to take cover while the bombers attacked. Dive bombers screamed down. Torpedo planes skimmed the waves. The Japanese ships fired everything they had. The sky filled with explosions. But it wasn't enough. That afternoon, Musashi took 19 torpedo hits and 17 bomb hits. By evening, the massive battleship rolled over and sank, taking more than 2,300 men with her, the largest warship ever destroyed by aircraft. McCampbell landed back on the Essex at 1700. The battle continued for 2 more days across hundreds of miles of ocean. When it ended, the Imperial Japanese Navy had lost 4 carriers, 3 battleships, 10 cruisers, and 11 destroyers. It would never recover as a fighting force. McCampbell flew his last combat mission on November 14, 1944. Air Group 15 returned home soon after. And by then, the balance of the war in the Pacific had already begun to shift irreversibly. McCampbell flew 212 combat missions, 34 confirmed kills, 21 enemy aircraft destroyed on the ground. He became the United States Navy's top fighter ace, the ace of aces, and the only fast carrier task force pilot to receive the Medal of Honor for aerial combat. In January 1945, President Franklin Roosevelt presented him with the nation's highest award. The citation told the story simply: 7 enemy aircraft destroyed during the Battle of the Philippine Sea, 9 more during Leyte Gulf, fighting against overwhelming odds with extraordinary skill. His actions broke up entire enemy formations before they could reach the fleet. He survived the war. He stayed in the Navy and retired as a captain in 1964 after 31 years of service. He lived quietly in Florida, far from the chaos he had once flown through. He gave interviews from time to time, spoke at aviation events, but never called himself a hero, just a pilot doing his job. He passed away on June 30th, 1996, at the age of 86, and was laid to rest at Arlington National Cemetery. His legacy didn't fade. In 2002, the U.S. Navy commissioned the destroyer USNS McCampbell DDG-85 in his honor. And the aircraft that carried him through that impossible mission still exists today. His F6F Hellcat, preserved at the National Naval Aviation Museum in Pensacola, Florida. Navy blue paint, white stars, 34 kill markings painted along the fuselage. The same aircraft that faced 60 enemy fighters that scored 9 kills in 90 minutes, that landed with just 2 rounds left, and an engine that died the moment it touched the deck. That record still stands today, more than 80 years later. Commander David McCampbell proved what one pilot with training discipline and absolute courage could achieve when everything was on the line. If this story stayed with you, take a second and hit like. It helps more people discover stories like this. Subscribe and turn on notifications if you want more real World War II stories told the way they deserve, human, intense, and unforgettable. And before you go, drop a comment. Where are you watching from? United States, UK, Canada, Australia, or somewhere else? And if someone in your family served, share their story, because remembering them is how they never disappear. What if the key to becoming America's deadliest fighter pilot wasn't raw aggression, but a quiet, calculated trick? Richard Bong, a farm boy from Wisconsin, defied the odds and destroyed 40 Japanese planes using a method so unexpected it seemed impossible. How did he turn precision into his greatest weapon? Find out how one trick changed the course of aerial warfare forever. In September 1944, high above the jungles of Borneo, Major Richard Ira Bong, the ace of the skies, guided his P-38 Lightning into a smooth dive. His twin Allison engines roared with a combined 3,000 horsepower as the bulletproof windscreen framed the chaos unfolding below. Japanese fighters were climbing furiously, desperate to intercept a squadron of American B-24 Liberators. But they had no idea that one of the deadliest pilots in the history of aerial warfare was already locking onto them from above. What they didn't know was that the unassuming farm boy from Poplar, Wisconsin, now tracking them through his sights, had already racked up dozens of kills. By the time the war ended, he would have 40 confirmed victories under his belt, cementing his place as the highest-scoring American fighter pilot, an unmatched record that stands to this day, 80 years later. This is the tale of how a mild-mannered kid from northern Wisconsin became America's most lethal pilot. A man who, despite early struggles in training, evolved into a near-perfect weapon of aerial combat. How a combination of raw talent, tireless training, and one of the most fearsome planes ever built would come together to create a legend in the Pacific theater. But the road to 40 victories didn't begin with a fiery passion for battle. No, it began with something far more pedestrian: disciplinary issues and unauthorized aerobatics in California. At Hamilton Field, California, Second Lieutenant Richard Bong was still fresh out of flight school at Luke Field, Arizona, and his experience with the P-38 Lightning was limited. Yet the young officer's enthusiasm led him to push the limits. Reports from the time indicated he was performing low-altitude acrobatics over the San Francisco area flights that blatantly violated Army Air Force regulations. His commanding officer, General George Kenney, was not impressed. The reprimand was swift and harsh, but General Kenney, one of the sharpest minds in the Pacific, saw something special in Bong. Beneath the reckless displays of youthful bravado, Kenney recognized raw potential, exceptional control of his aircraft, lightning-fast reflexes, and a sense of spatial awareness that was beyond the norm. Rather than end Bong's career, Kenney decided to give him a second chance, assigning him to more training and keeping a close eye on his progress. What Kenney saw that others missed were the qualities that separated good pilots from the exceptional ones. Impeccable depth perception, the ability to instinctively calculate angles for shooting, and remarkable composure under pressure. These were rare skills that, with the right guidance, could transform Bong into something extraordinary. By September 1942, Bong was flying with the 9th Fighter Squadron, 49th Fighter Group, stationed in New Guinea with the 5th Air Force. Despite his limited combat experience, he was up against an enemy that had been fighting for years. Japanese pilots, hardened by the brutal air campaigns over China, the Philippines, and across the Pacific, had far more experience in the skies. The odds were heavily stacked against Bong. But the young pilot was about to prove that in aerial combat, heart and skill could tilt the balance of power. If you're amazed by Richard Bong's transformation from a rookie pilot into one of the deadliest figures in aviation history, make sure to show some love by hitting that like button. His story is just the beginning. If you want to hear more incredible tales of courage, skill, and perseverance, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. You won't want to miss out on more unforgettable moments like this. Keep flying with us. December 1942, above the dense jungles of Búnker, New Guinea. Lieutenant Richard Bong, now a fledgling combat pilot, took to the skies for his first missions. The P-38S from the 9th Squadron climbed sharply to intercept Japanese bombers, escorted by the deadly A-6M0 fighters. Flying wingman Bong watched as the enemy formations emerged from the clouds ominously close. Mitsubishi bombers flanked by the highly maneuverable Zeros were a formidable challenge. But the P-38 Lightning was unlike anything the Japanese had encountered. With its twin-boom design and twin engines, it was an engineering marvel, packing 50-caliber machine guns and a 120mm cannon for devastating firepower. Capable of reaching speeds over 400 miles per hour and soaring above 40,000 feet, it could outpace and outclimb most Japanese aircraft. Yet the Zero, known for its agility at low speeds, could outmaneuver the P-38 in a tight turn. Most American pilots who tried to outturn the Zeros ended up dead. Bong, however, didn't fall into that trap. Instead of engaging in a deadly dogfight, Bong leveraged the P-38's strength, speed, altitude, and firepower. His early kills came not through wild maneuvers, but by positioning himself carefully, using the Lightning's sheer power to unleash devastating bursts of concentrated fire from its nose-mounted guns. His combat reports were minimal, only noting essential details like altitude and outcomes, but his tactics were already becoming clear. Bong was learning to avoid dogfighting, relying on precise firing and tactical positioning to get the job done. The P-38 was a complex machine built by Lockheed's legendary Clarence Kelly Johnson, with incredible power but a set of quirks that could kill the inexperienced. The counter-rotating propellers reduced torque but introduced odd handling characteristics, while the turbo superchargers were temperamental. And perhaps most dangerously, the aircraft suffered from compressibility at high-speed dives where shock waves could destroy control surfaces. Many pilots had died trying to master these limitations, but Bong, ever the quick learner, didn't just survive. He mastered the P-38. By early 1943, Bong had already accumulated multiple confirmed kills, his reputation growing. He distinguished himself from other pilots who sprayed long bursts of ammo. Bong fired short, controlled bursts, maximizing efficiency. His squadron mate, Major Thomas Lynch, described Bong as patient, precise, and a true marksman. He would carefully position himself, often making extensive maneuvers to gain an advantage, then close the gap and unleash a short, controlled burst before quickly disengaging. His efficiency in ammunition usage set him apart. But Bong's real secret weapon was his mastery of deflection, shooting, the ability to instinctively calculate where a moving target would be when his bullets arrived. While most pilots struggled to make this adjustment, Bong did it with seamless precision, making him a standout in every engagement. His tactical evolution was rapid, and by 1943, he had already carved a place for himself as one of the most deadly pilots in the skies. By July 1943, over the skies of Leyte, New Guinea, Lieutenant Richard Bong's victory count was climbing steadily. The Japanese had launched another bombing raid, this time escorted by the deadly Zero fighters targeting Allied positions as the Japanese bombers closed in. American fighters climbed into the fray, preparing to intercept. What followed demonstrated Bong's growing tactical brilliance. Rather than diving straight into the battle, he positioned himself and his squadron with the altitude advantage, waiting for the perfect opportunity. He studied the enemy's formations, watching for the inevitable gaps in the bombers' defensive coverage. It was in these moments of vulnerability that Bong struck. With the speed of a predator, Bong's P-38 Lightning dived from above, catching the bombers before the Zeros could mount an effective defense. His attack was quick, precise, and devastating. The combined firepower of the P-38's 4.50 caliber machine guns and a 120mm cannon could tear through enemy aircraft in an instant when aimed correctly. Bong's approach was to convert altitude into speed, executing high-speed attack passes before climbing back to altitude positioning for another strike. These tactics made him a nightmare for the Japanese. The Zeros, renowned for their agility at low speeds, often couldn't react fast enough to intercept Bong's P-38. In just a few missions, Bong was racking up multiple kills, a pattern that became increasingly common. What set him apart even further was his remarkable efficiency in ammunition. His kill-to-ammo ratio was consistently lower than that of other pilots, a testament to his precision and control. As American formations adopted Bong's tactics, attacking from altitude, striking quickly and disengaging just as fast, they began to see results. Losses were minimal and success rates soared. Japanese intelligence started to notice the shift in American fighter tactics, identifying patterns in the reports, particularly Bong's distinct P-38 marked with the name Marge in honor of his girlfriend back in Wisconsin. By November 1943, Bong's confirmed victories had reached 21, solidifying his place as one of America's top aces. General George Kenney, his commanding officer, personally decorated him with the Distinguished Service Cross and sent him home for a war bond tour. The American public embraced their new hero, but Bong, ever committed to his mission, requested to return to combat. In March 1944, Bong was back in New Guinea, now flying the upgraded P-38J, equipped with improved engines, better cockpit heating, and hydraulically boosted ailerons for enhanced high-speed maneuverability. The tide of war had shifted while the Japanese struggled to replace their losses. The American pilots, including Bong, had the advantage. With extensive training, superior experience, and increasingly refined tactics, the gap in skill between the two sides had grown wide. Bong was ready to continue his relentless pursuit of victory. If you're captivated by Richard Bong's incredible journey and want to share where you're tuning in from, let us know in the comments. Are you watching from the United States, or perhaps from other parts of the world, like the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, or maybe even places like Germany, Japan, or Brazil? We'd love to hear your location and connect with viewers from all corners of the globe. By April 1944, Richard Bong was firmly established as one of the most skilled pilots in the Pacific, leading bomber escort flights above Hollandia, New Guinea. Bong's tactics were continuously evolving. Intelligence reports indicated that Japanese fighters were increasingly attempting to intercept American strike packages, and Bong was ready. He expertly positioned his formations for maximum advantage, ensuring altitude superiority whenever possible, then timed his attacks to exploit the enemy's weaknesses. These strategic approaches often resulted in favorable kill ratios, and Bong added to his personal tally while also leading effective defensive operations for bomber formations. Bong's combat techniques were built around several key principles. He knew the importance of maintaining an energy advantage, particularly through altitude, and used the P-38's incredible speed to quickly engage and disengage from combat. His attacks focused on exploiting the P-38's concentrated firepower, making use of its 4.50 caliber machine guns and 120mm cannon for maximum damage. Bong avoided getting into turning fights, which would negate the advantages of the P-38, preferring instead to rely on head-on attacks. These required nerve and precise timing. The engagement windows were brief, and while most pilots broke off early, Bong's willingness to stay with his attack runs gave him consistent advantages. Bong's P-38 was capable of maintaining high speeds in dives, a feature that allowed him to pursue Japanese fighters attempting to escape. Many enemy aircraft couldn't match the P-38's speed, which provided Bong with the upper hand. His ammunition efficiency was also remarkable. His confirmed kills per sortie ratio was significantly better than the average pilot, demonstrating his precision and skill in combat. While exact round counts varied, Bong consistently used fewer rounds than most pilots to achieve a kill, showcasing his remarkable accuracy. By June 1944, Bong's victory total had climbed to 28, surpassing Eddie Rickenbacker's World War I record of 26 kills, making him America's highest-scoring ace. General George Kenney, recognizing Bong's invaluable contribution, initially prohibited him from routine combat missions, deeming him too valuable to risk. Frustrated by the restriction, Bong pushed to return to operations, and Kenney eventually relented, but with conditions. Bong was allowed to fly, but only as a flight leader on high-priority missions with experienced pilots assigned to provide additional coverage for him. General Kenney's decision was an attempt to protect his most successful ace, ensuring that Bong's skills would be preserved for critical operations. Despite the limitations, Bong's kill rate didn't significantly slow. Flying high-priority missions often meant facing some of the most capable enemy pilots, and Bong continued to prove his superiority, consistently defeating them in aerial combat. In October 1944, over Balikpapan, Borneo, Richard Bong was once again in the thick of combat, leading a group of P-38s to intercept a large-scale Japanese counterattack aimed at American bombers striking vital oil refineries. Bong's tactical brilliance was on full display as he positioned his formations with the sun at their backs and ensured altitude superiority. These two advantages allowed him to time his attacks perfectly, striking when the Japanese fighters were preoccupied with the bombers. The initial attacks were devastatingly effective, with Bong and his pilots destroying multiple enemy aircraft in quick succession. However, the Japanese forces began to adapt, employing more coordinated and effective responses. During one of these engagements, Bong's aircraft sustained significant damage, including hits to the engine. Most pilots would have disengaged immediately after such damage, but Bong was no ordinary pilot. He skillfully feathered the damaged engine, activated the fire suppression system, and continued the fight on just a single engine. The P-38, designed with redundancy in mind, was capable of flying and fighting even with one engine compromised, though performance would naturally degrade. Despite the damage, Bong's relentless drive to complete the mission allowed him to continue engaging the enemy, scoring additional kills before making his way back to base. Ground crews were astonished by the extensive damage to Bong's aircraft, but despite predictions, that it would be combat ineffective, the plane was repaired. Bong wasted no time in flying the restored fighter once again, demonstrating not just his remarkable skill in combat, but also his resilience. By December 1944, Bong had reached 40 confirmed victories, solidifying his status as America's highest-scoring fighter pilot. However, his unparalleled success came at a cost. General George Kenney, under orders from General Douglas MacArthur, was forced to ground Bong permanently. The reasoning was simple. Bong had become too valuable as a symbol of American air power and as an asset for training new pilots. His place in history was secure, but his time in combat was over. Richard Bong's final combat mission took place on December 17, 1940, a routine patrol with no enemy contact. After this mission, he returned to the United States as America's highest-scoring fighter pilot, a recipient of the Medal of Honor, and a national hero. While his impressive 40 confirmed kills were a significant part of his legacy, they tell only a fraction of the story. Bong's true impact was measured not only in the number of aircraft he destroyed, but in the countless bomber crews he protected, the ground troops he supported, and the tactical innovations he introduced that became foundational to American fighter pilots in the Pacific. His exceptional gunnery techniques were incorporated into training manuals, and his tactical approaches, using altitude attacking from favorable positions and exploiting the P-38 Lightning's strengths while avoiding its weaknesses, became the standard doctrine for fighter operations. New pilots studied Bong's combat reports and gun camera footage, and Japanese pilots who survived the war later spoke of facing skilled American pilots who effectively used altitude speed and concentrated firepower. They recognized Bong's precision and tactical discipline as nearly impossible to counter. Letters Bong wrote to his fiancée, Marge Vatendal, painted a picture of a thoughtful and self-aware young man. He often reflected on the gravity of his role, focusing on protecting bomber formations and supporting ground operations rather than seeking personal glory. His humility in his letters showed his understanding of the responsibility he carried. The P-38 Lightning itself deserves recognition as one of the most successful fighter designs in history. Over 10,000 units were produced during World War II, serving in every theater. In the Pacific, pilots who understood how to exploit its strengths made the P-38 a formidable aircraft. Its twin-engine configuration offered redundancy, improving survivability, while its tricycle landing gear made ground handling easier. The nose-mounted weapons eliminated convergence issues that plagued wing-mounted guns, and the turbo superchargers gave the P-38 high-altitude performance that many Japanese fighters could not match. With 4.50 caliber machine guns and a 120mm cannon, the P-38 delivered devastating firepower, capable of rapidly destroying enemy aircraft when aimed accurately. Bong's exceptional marksmanship and deflection shooting skills enabled him to achieve remarkably short engagement times. Technical analysis of his gun camera footage showed that his hit percentage was extraordinarily high compared to the average fighter pilot, with his accuracy consistently standing far above typical performance. After the war in August 1945, Bong, now married to Marge, was assigned as a test pilot for Lockheed, where he was tasked with conducting acceptance flights on the P-80 Shooting Star, America's first operational jet aircraft. The P-80 represented the future of aviation, with a jet engine producing 4,000 pounds of thrust speeds exceeding 500 miles per hour and cutting-edge technology that made piston-driven fighters like the P-38 obsolete. Bong was transitioning from flying P-38s to jets, learning a completely new flight regime. Tragically, on August 6, 1945, during a test flight, Bong's P-80 suffered a catastrophic fuel pump failure shortly after takeoff. The engine failed at low altitude, leaving Bong with insufficient time or altitude to recover. He attempted to restart the engine, but was unsuccessful. As the situation became dire, Bong tried to return to the runway, but couldn't make it. In his final seconds, he attempted to bail out, but the altitude was too low, and the P-80 crashed. Major Richard Ira Bong. America's ace of aces died instantly at the age of 24. On the same day, the world was introduced to the atomic age as the American B-29 bomber Enola Gay dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima, Japan. Bong's death was overshadowed by the historic event, receiving limited coverage in the news. Despite his passing, Richard Bong's legacy as a legendary fighter pilot, mentor, and tactical innovator remains etched in history. His story is one of extraordinary skill, sacrifice, and humility, forever remembered as one of America's greatest heroes of World War II. 80 years after Richard Bong's final combat mission, his remarkable record of 40 confirmed victories remains unbroken, and it's likely to stay that way permanently. Modern air combat, dominated by beyond visual range missiles and radar-guided weapons, no longer involves the close-range dogfighting that defined World War II aerial battles. The young pilot who once struggled with disciplinary issues would go on to master the fundamentals of air combat, including patience, precision, and effective deflection and shooting. He didn't rely on aggression or recklessness. Instead, Bong's approach was grounded in calculated positioning and flawless execution. Every engagement he entered was the result of careful planning, and each kill was a product of precise positioning and accurate fire. At the Richard Bong Veterans Historical Center in Superior, Wisconsin, visitors can explore displays that honor his legacy. His Medal of Honor flight logs, documenting 200 combat missions, and a restored P-38 Lightning with the iconic Marge nose art offer a glimpse into the life and accomplishments of this extraordinary pilot. General George Kenney, who had seen Bong's potential early on, later wrote that Bong was the most effective fighter pilot he had observed. Kenney praised Bong's emphasis on precision and technique, noting that his effectiveness appeared effortless due to his consistent application of sound tactical principles. The battlefields where Bong earned his 40 victories are now peaceful, and the wreckage of the Japanese fighters he destroyed has long since dissolved into the tropical soil. But the record remains unbroken. The young man from Wisconsin who became America's deadliest fighter pilot, the ace of aces who turned precision and discipline into unparalleled combat effectiveness, will forever be remembered. Bong proved that in aerial warfare, superior technique and consistent execution produce exceptional results. With 40 confirmed victories, survival through 200 combat missions, and flawless success in air-to-air engagements, Bong's numbers tell the full story. His record speaks for itself, and nearly 8 decades later, no American pilot has surpassed what Richard Ira Bong accomplished in the skies of the Pacific. His legacy is a testament to the power of precision and discipline in combat qualities that made him not just a hero, but a legend. What if one of the most legendary fighters of World War II was once considered a dangerous failure? From disastrous carrier trials to dominating the skies over the Pacific and even returning to battle in Korea, the bent-wing Corsair carved out one of the most astonishing stories in aviation history. Today we reveal the legendary rise of the F4U Corsair, a story far more unbelievable than you ever imagined. The year is 1943, and across the United States, newspapers are buzzing with one of the most dramatic stories of the war. Reports tell of a rough band of fighter pilots flying a strange bent-wing aircraft that seems unstoppable in the skies over the Pacific. Mission after mission, Japanese aircraft are shot down, and almost overnight a new name spreads across the country, the Corsair. For the American public, it appears suddenly a powerful new fighter tied to daring pilots like Gregory "Pappy" Boyington and his infamous Black Sheep Squadron. In the headlines, the Corsair is already becoming a legend. But the headlines hide a deeper story. As tales of victories dominate the news, many of the most critical chapters of the Corsair's history quietly disappear from view. Behind the heroic images lies a far more complicated reality, one filled with design struggles, dangerous flaws, and moments when the aircraft nearly failed completely. By digging into archived documents, wartime reports, and restored footage, a startling truth begins to emerge before it became a legend. The F4U Corsair came dangerously close to becoming one of the greatest failures in aviation history. The story begins 5 years earlier in 1938, when the United States Navy issued a request to aircraft manufacturers. With global tensions rising and new technologies appearing overseas, Navy leaders realized their fighter fleet was quickly becoming outdated. They needed something revolutionary. The request called for a single-engine, single-seat interceptor capable of stopping enemy bombers before they could reach the fleet. The requirements were demanding a range of 1,000 miles, a low stall speed of just 70 miles per hour, and even the ability to drop special anti-aircraft bombs into enemy formations, an experimental concept believed to have potential in future air combat. Yet one requirement stood above all the others. The Navy made it clear that speed would be the most important factor. Experience had shown that the faster aircraft often controlled the fight. Speed meant choosing when to attack, when to escape, and sometimes deciding the outcome of a dogfight before it even began. In the 1938 competition, the fastest design would receive the highest score. But hidden within the same document was another requirement, one that would soon create enormous problems. The aircraft also had to operate from aircraft carriers, meaning it had to take off and land safely on the short, unstable decks of naval ships. One man who took this challenge seriously was Rex Beisel, chief engineer at the Vought Aircraft Company. Beisel was a remarkable figure in early aviation. Largely self-taught, he had entered the field when aeronautical engineering barely existed, becoming one of the first certified aeronautical engineers in the United States in 1919. By the late 1930s, he had already designed several successful Navy aircraft, including the SBB-2U Vindicator and the SBU Corsair. Those aircraft had earned him respect, but they were only a prelude. Because in response to the Navy's challenge, Beisel set out to design something far more ambitious, the fastest carrier fighter ever built. And the radical choices required to achieve that goal would soon push aviation engineering to its limits and nearly doom the Corsair before it ever reached combat. If you're enjoying this story and want to see how the Corsair went from a risky experiment to one of the most feared fighters of World War II, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next chapter. Shortly after the Navy issued its request, Rex Beisel and the engineers at Vought began designing a fighter unlike anything the Navy had ever seen. Their strategy was bold build, the fastest carrier fighter in the world. To achieve that, they chose the enormous Pratt & Whitney R2-800 Double Wasp, the most powerful engine ever considered for a naval fighter at the time. Mounting such a large engine on the nose of a single-seat aircraft was already a challenge, but Beisel pushed the idea even further. The aircraft, called the Vought Model 166B, would also carry the largest wings ever proposed for a Navy fighter. To turn the engine's power into speed, the team selected a gigantic 13-foot Hamilton Standard propeller, the largest propeller ever installed on a fighter aircraft. But that giant propeller created a major problem. Normally, it would require extremely long landing gear to keep the blades from striking the ground. On carrier aircraft, long landing gear were fragile and dangerous during rough deck landings. The solution was radical: an inverted gull wing. By bending the wings downward near the fuselage and upward again toward the tips, the design allowed shorter, stronger landing gear while still clearing the enormous propeller. The unusual shape also reduced aerodynamic drag, potentially giving the aircraft a speed advantage. However, the large wings and the folding mechanisms required for carrier storage made the aircraft heavier and more complex to build. For Beisel's team, none of that mattered. Speed remained the priority. As the Navy's design competition intensified, engineers and officers compared each proposal by weight range, altitude, performance, and other factors. Yet maximum speed remained the deciding category. In that area, the Vought 166B delivered exactly what it was built to do. It posted the highest projected top speed of any competitor and earned the most points in the evaluation. By the Navy's own rules, Vought had technically won the contest. Still, doubts lingered. Some Navy officials wondered whether the extra complexity was worth the small gain in speed. Was the difference between 336 miles per hour and 351 miles per hour at 17,500 feet really worth the heavier aircraft and larger wings? Rival companies such as Brewster offered more conventional designs and nearly took the contract. For a moment, it seemed possible that the Navy might reject the radical Vought fighter entirely. Brewster was already promoting its aircraft aggressively, especially the Brewster Buffalo, which the company hoped would become the backbone of the Navy's air fleet. In the end, the Navy stayed true to its own requirement speed above everything else. Vaught's design was officially declared the winner, and development moved forward. By 1940, the first prototype, the XF-4U-1, was ready for its maiden flight. The aircraft flew successfully in May, but the real breakthrough came later that year. During speed tests in October, the prototype stunned engineers by becoming the first single-engine fighter in history to exceed 400 miles per hour. Yet the celebration did not last long. As testing continued, the price of designing an aircraft almost entirely around speed began to appear. Dangerous wing flutter developed during flights, damaging control surfaces and forcing redesigns. Even more troubling were stall and spin problems, as the unusual gull wings sometimes disrupted airflow around the tail and interfered with elevator control. And just as engineers were struggling with these issues, another challenge arrived. Reports from the Battle of Britain revealed that .30 caliber machine guns were no longer powerful enough for modern air combat. Unfortunately, those were exactly the weapons the Navy had originally specified for the Corsair, meaning the aircraft that had just broken the 400-mile-per-hour barrier was about to face a major redesign. Back in the Vought workshops, the redesigned F4U Corsair was beginning to take shape. In the early prototype, the aircraft actually looked slightly different from the Corsair most people remember today. The nose was shorter, and the cockpit sat farther forward along the fuselage. That layout existed because the original design carried .30 caliber machine guns in the nose. But when combat lessons from Europe proved those weapons were no longer powerful enough, everything had to change. Engineers removed the nose guns, installed 6.50 caliber machine guns in the wings, and moved fuel tanks into the forward fuselage. To make space, the nose had to be lengthened and the cockpit pushed farther back. The result was the Corsair's now famous long hose nose, a design that dramatically reduced forward visibility, especially during carrier landings. Unfortunately, those visibility issues appeared at exactly the worst possible moment. When the Corsair began its first carrier qualification trials, the results were troubling. Many pilots struggled simply to keep the aircraft carrier in sight during the final approach. And the problems did not stop there. The Corsair was larger and heavier than most naval fighters of the time, weighing around 12,000 pounds at landing. When pilots touched down too hard, which happened often due to poor visibility, the aircraft had a dangerous tendency to bounce off the deck. Those bounces could damage landing gear, strike the enormous 13-foot propeller against the deck, or cause the tailhook to miss the arresting cables entirely. In carrier operations, missing a cable could quickly turn into disaster. Then another problem emerged, one far more dangerous. During slow approaches, the left wing had a tendency to stall before the right, sending the aircraft into a sudden and often unrecoverable spin. Combined with the powerful torque from the massive propeller, even a small mistake during landing could cause a loss of control. Situations like a bolter, when a pilot missed the arresting cable and had to suddenly accelerate and take off again, became especially hazardous. To the Navy, these issues made the Corsair look deeply flawed. Among pilots, the aircraft quickly earned grim nicknames like the Bent Wing Widowmaker and the Ensign Eliminator. For a moment, it seemed the Corsair story might end almost as soon as it began. Grumman seized the opportunity, introducing its new F6F Hellcat, a far more forgiving carrier fighter. The Navy quickly embraced it, leaving the Corsair without a clear role. But while the Navy moved toward the Hellcat, many Corsairs were already built, and someone else desperately needed a modern fighter. That someone was the United States Marine Corps. Unlike Navy pilots, Marines operated mostly from island airstrips in the Pacific, not aircraft carriers. And once the Corsair was free from the challenges of landing on moving decks, its true strengths began to shine. In the air, the aircraft was fast, powerful, and incredibly capable. Compared to the Marines' aging F4F Wildcat, the Corsair was enormous, about 3 feet taller and more than a ton heavier, but also dramatically faster and better armed. At the altitudes where many Pacific dogfights occurred, around 17,000 feet, and below, the Corsair was even faster than the famous P-47 Thunderbolt. That made it perfectly suited for the Pacific theater. The first Marine unit to receive the aircraft was Marine Fighting Squadron 5 MF-124, which arrived at Henderson Field on Guadalcanal in February 1943. But the pilots had almost no time to prepare. Production delays meant many of them had less than 30 hours of flight time in the Corsair, and some had never even fired its weapons. Just days later, they would be thrown into combat. On February 14, 1943, the Corsair would face its first real test in a mission that history would later remember as the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, when American bombers and escort fighters launched an attack on a Japanese airstrip at Bougainville. And for the inexperienced Corsair pilots flying into battle that day, the results would be anything but smooth. Before we move on with the story, a quick question for everyone watching: where in the world are you watching this from today? Drop your country and city in the comments. Are you tuning in from the United States, Vietnam, the United Kingdom, Australia, Canada, or somewhere else entirely? It's always fascinating to see how far this community reaches. In February 1943, the Marine Corsairs of VMF-124 were finally sent into combat. Their mission was to escort B-24 Liberators and PBY Catalinas, attacking a Japanese airfield on Bougainville, flying alongside several Army P-38 Lightnings. Many of the Corsair pilots had barely 30 hours of flight time in the aircraft. Waiting for them above the island were nearly 50 Japanese Zero fighters, led by experienced ace Shoichi Sugita. As the American formation approached the target, the Zeros attacked immediately. The battle quickly turned chaotic. Japanese fighters shot down 4 P-38s and 2 Liberators, then struck the Corsairs. One of the victims was Second Lieutenant Harold Stewart, whose aircraft was riddled with bullets through the main fuel tank. A fellow pilot later recalled watching gasoline spray from the holes as Stewart tried to stay with the formation. After about 10 minutes, his fuel ran out. From nearly 20,000 feet, he waved goodbye, glided toward the ocean, and made a successful water landing. For a brief moment, it looked like he might survive, but the pursuing Zeros continued to strafe the downed pilot. Stewart was never seen again. The Corsair did achieve its first combat victory, but only by accident. During the dogfight, an F-4U flown by Lieutenant Gordon Lee Lyon collided with a Japanese Zero, destroying both aircraft. When the battle ended, the results were grim: 8 American aircraft lost, including 2 Corsairs, while the Japanese lost only 1 Zero. The clash became known as the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, leaving a harsh first impression for the new fighter. After the disaster, daylight raids on Bougainville were postponed. But the Corsair's reputation would not remain dark for long. Marine pilots soon learned how to fight the Zero effectively. One of the key figures was Kenneth Walsh of VMF-124. Using intelligence from a captured Japanese Zero and lessons from early battles, Marine pilots discovered a simple truth: altitude and speed were everything. The Corsair was faster, stronger in dives, and far more powerful, but only if pilots avoided slow-turning fights where the Zero excelled. By April 1943, these tactics began to pay off. On April 1st, Walsh scored some of the Corsair's first clear victories, shooting down 2 Zeros and a dive bomber over the Russell Islands. A newly arrived Marine squadron joined the battle that day, and one rookie pilot later wrote in his logbook, April Fool's Day, but not for us. During the engagement, American fighters shot down 19 Japanese aircraft while suffering only a few losses. For the first time, the Marines believed they had found the answer to the zero. Walsh soon became the first official Corsair ace, rapidly increasing his score in the weeks that followed. The aircraft, once mocked as the Ensign Eliminator, was proving to be extremely effective against enemy fighters. Even Japanese engineers noticed. Jiro Horikoshi, the designer of the Mitsubishi Zero, later admitted that the Corsair was the first American fighter to seriously challenge Japan's famous aircraft thanks to its superior speed and diving ability. By the summer of 1943, more Corsair squadrons were arriving across the Pacific as pilots refined their tactics and Vought improved production. The once troubled fighter was quickly earning a reputation as one of the most dangerous aircraft in the sky. And among the growing number of Corsair units, one squadron would soon become legendary Marine Fighting Squadron 214, better known as the Black Sheep. In September 1943, a new Marine squadron took to the skies over the Pacific, NMF 214, better known as the Black Sheep. Their leader was one of the most colorful and controversial personalities in Marine aviation history, Major Gregory "Pappy" Boyington. The squadron itself was an unusual mix of replacement pilots and experienced aviators without assignments. But once they climbed into their Corsairs, something remarkable happened. Time and again, they seemed to appear exactly where the fight was hottest, and the victories quickly followed. Their fame exploded after one dramatic mission in the Solomon Islands. During a massive American raid involving nearly 150 Dauntless dive bombers and Avenger torpedo bombers, Boyington's fighters clashed with Japanese defenders over Bougainville. In a single engagement, Boyington personally shot down 5 Zeros, instantly becoming one of the leading aces in the South Pacific with 11 total victories. American newspapers seized on the story, celebrating the daring Marine pilots and their strange bent-wing fighter. For the next 80 days, Boyington and the Black Sheep dominated the skies of the South Pacific, destroying 97 Japanese aircraft. Their success brought enormous publicity to the Corsair, turning the once criticized aircraft into a symbol of American air power. But their story took a tragic turn in January 1944, when Boyington was shot down over the Pacific just as the squadron's combat tour ended. Though believed dead at the time, he survived and spent 20 months as a prisoner of war in Japan before returning home, his legend and that of the Corsair firmly established. Meanwhile, something important was happening behind the scenes. The U.S. Navy, which had once rejected the Corsair for carrier operations, was reconsidering. Engineers had made improvements, and the British Royal Navy had already proven the aircraft could operate from carriers. With few alternatives available, the British adopted the Corsair early and quickly developed new landing techniques, most notably a curved approach that allowed pilots to keep the carrier in sight during landing. The British also introduced several key modifications. Some Corsairs had their wings clipped to fit on smaller British carriers, which unexpectedly improved landing performance. They also added a bulged canopy and raised the pilot's seat by 7 inches, dramatically improving visibility. These improvements were so successful that they were later adopted on American Corsairs as well. In total, more than 2,000 Corsairs were delivered to the Royal Navy, serving in both the Pacific and European theaters. However, not all were built equally. Around 400 Corsairs, produced under contract by the Brewster Company, known as the Corsair Mark III, suffered serious quality problems. Faulty wing fittings led to structural failures in flight, and after several dangerous incidents, the aircraft were banned from aerobatics and never reached frontline service. Soon after, the U.S. Navy canceled Brewster's Corsair contract, and the company collapsed entirely. By April 1944, with British experience in design improvements proving the aircraft's potential, the U.S. Navy finally cleared the Corsair for carrier operations. Ironically, while the Navy was only just beginning its Corsair era, the Marines had already spent more than a year mastering the aircraft and turning it into one of the most feared fighters in the Pacific skies. Before we continue the story, here's something worth asking our audience. Did anyone in your family serve during World War II? Maybe a grandfather who flew in the Pacific, a great-grandmother who worked in a factory on the home front, or a relative who fought in Europe, North Africa, or the Atlantic. If your family has a connection to that generation, share their name, where they served, and their story in the comments. Those personal histories help keep the memory of that era alive. By 1944, the land-based Corsairs operating from places like Guadalcanal were already being modified to improve performance. Mechanics removed unnecessary carrier equipment such as tail hooks and sometimes even the folding wing mechanisms, reducing weight and making the aircraft faster and more agile. As a result, the Corsair's success in combat only continued to grow. But as the war progressed, its role began to change. By late 1944, Japanese air power had weakened significantly. Fewer enemy aircraft appeared in the sky, and many of their pilots lacked the experience of earlier years. Because of this, the Corsair increasingly shifted from pure air-to-air combat into a new role, low-level fighter-bomber support for Allied island invasions. The brutal reality of fighting in the Pacific forced this change. Japanese forces often hid deep inside jungles, caves, and fortified positions. Clearing them out on foot was slow and extremely costly. With Allied air superiority, close air support became the key to breaking these defenses, and the Corsair proved perfect for the job. It could carry up to 4,000 pounds of bombs, along with napalm or powerful HVAR rockets, devastating weapons against jungle fortifications. Because the aircraft had been designed with a relatively low stall speed, it could fly low and slow over the battlefield, allowing pilots to carefully locate and strike enemy positions. During the invasion of the Philippines in late 1944, Corsair squadrons demonstrated just how effective they were in this new role. But the fighting there also revealed another urgent mission. Japanese forces had begun launching large numbers of kamikaze attacks against Allied invasion fleets. The Navy's Hellcat fighters could not stop them alone, so Corsair squadrons were often called in to intercept the incoming suicide aircraft before they reached the ships. These missions continued through the final months of the war, leading to some of the Corsair's most important contributions during the invasions of Iwo Jima and Okinawa. Japanese defenders on both islands fought from heavily fortified tunnels and bunkers, determined to defend every inch of ground. The battles were some of the fiercest of the entire war. In response, Marine and Navy Corsair squadrons refined their fighter-bomber tactics, learning how to precisely locate and destroy hidden enemy positions. Thanks to Allied news crews embedded with the Marines, there is remarkable color footage of these attacks. Again and again, Corsairs can be seen diving toward the islands, releasing rockets, bombs, and napalm onto Japanese strongpoints. For the exhausted soldiers fighting below, the sight of the bent-wing fighters roaring overhead often meant survival. While the battles of Iwo Jima and Okinawa still produced enormous casualties, the devastating firepower delivered by the Corsair undoubtedly saved many lives on the ground. In the final months of the war, Corsairs also helped strike targets on the Japanese home islands. When Japan finally surrendered in August 1945, it seemed the combat career of the famous bent-wing fighter had come to an end. But the story of the F4U Corsair was far from over. In fact, its next chapter in combat would begin sooner than almost anyone expected. After 1945, the story of the F4U Corsair seemed as though it might finally be coming to an end. World War II had concluded, and aviation was entering a completely new era. Military planners around the world were turning their attention toward jet-powered aircraft, believing that speed alone would define the future of air combat. Despite this shift, production of the Corsair continued for several more years, although in smaller numbers. The aircraft was still relatively new, extremely rugged, and had already proven itself to be one of the most reliable fighters ever built. Then in 1950, the Korean War erupted, and the Corsair unexpectedly found itself returning to combat. At the start of the conflict, American commanders believed the battlefield would be dominated by jets, such as the F-80 Shooting Star and the F-9F Panther. Years of research and development after World War II had focused almost entirely on jet technology. These aircraft were faster than anything before them, and many believed propeller-driven fighters like the Corsair had already become obsolete. But the skies over Korea quickly revealed a different reality. The country's rugged mountains, narrow valleys, and unpredictable weather created difficult conditions for air operations. Jet aircraft could reach the battlefield quickly, but their tremendous speed made it difficult for pilots to locate and accurately strike small targets on the ground. Even more problematic was their high fuel consumption. Early jets could remain over a battlefield for only a short period, often less than 3 hours, before needing to return to base. The Corsair, however, was built for endurance. Powered by its piston engine, the F4U could remain in the air for up to 10 hours, allowing it to patrol over battlefields and provide continuous support to troops on the ground. In the rough terrain of Korea, where soldiers often fought in hills, forests, and narrow passes, this kind of persistent air cover became incredibly valuable. Operating from carriers such as the USS Valley Forge and USS Philippine Sea Corsair squadrons quickly returned to a familiar role: close air support. Much like during the Pacific Island campaigns of World War II, the Corsair proved devastating as a fighter bomber. Each aircraft could carry 4 1,000-pound bombs and 8 5-inch rockets, striking bridges, rail yards, supply convoys, and communication centers that supported enemy forces. The aircraft's slower speed compared to jets actually became an advantage. Corsair pilots could carefully line up their attacks, delivering far more precise strikes against ground targets. In many cases, soldiers fighting on the front lines preferred the Corsair overhead because it could stay longer, react faster to requests for help, and strike with greater accuracy. For a time, the same bent-wing fighter that had battled Japanese Zeros in the Pacific once again became one of the most valuable aircraft in the war. It proved that endurance, reliability, and versatility could still rival the newest technology. Eventually, however, aviation technology continued to advance. As jet engines improved, gaining greater range, better fuel efficiency, and more accurate weapon systems, the advantages of piston engine fighters slowly faded. And so, after more than a decade of service and 2 major wars, the remarkable combat career of the F4U Corsair finally approached its end, leaving behind a legacy as one of the most successful and adaptable fighter aircraft in aviation history. Later in the Korean War, a new and dangerous threat appeared in the skies: the Soviet-built MiG-15. These cutting-edge jet fighters were far faster than any propeller aircraft and carried heavy cannon armament. Once they began appearing in larger numbers, the Corsair suddenly found itself at a serious disadvantage. The aircraft that had once dominated piston engine fighters could no longer operate with the same freedom it had enjoyed earlier in the war. Even so, the Corsair still managed a few remarkable moments. On one occasion, an F4U pilot successfully scored a confirmed kill against a MiG-15, a rare achievement for a propeller-driven aircraft facing a jet fighter. Another Navy pilot, Guy Bourdillon, even became an ace in 1952 while flying the Corsair, shooting down 5 enemy piston engine aircraft during nighttime missions. But despite these successes, it was clear that the era of piston fighters was coming to an end. By 1953, the decision had been made. The long combat career of the Corsair was finally drawing to a close. At the Chance Vought Aircraft Division of United Aircraft Corporation, the Navy prepared to accept the final production Corsair. This aircraft, Corsair number 12571, marked the end of an era. It would be the last propeller-driven fighter aircraft built in the United States. From that moment forward, naval aviation would move entirely into the age of jet fighters. Yet even after production stopped, the Corsair's story did not end immediately. The aircraft continued serving for years with the United States and several other nations around the world in various roles. Remarkably, the final combat use of the F4U would not occur until 1969, nearly 3 decades after its first flight. Today, the bent-wing Corsair holds a special place in aviation history. Instantly recognizable with its distinctive gull wings and powerful engine, it became one of the most effective combat aircraft ever built. During World War II, Corsair pilots achieved a remarkable 11-to-1 kill ratio against enemy aircraft, 11-to-1 kill ratio against enemy aircraft, while also delivering devastating strikes against ground targets. In countless battles, its rockets, bombs, and napalm helped support troops on the ground and save lives. The Corsair was more than just an airplane. It was a machine that adapted to 2 wars, survived the transition from propellers to jets, and left behind a legacy that still fascinates aviation enthusiasts today. Decades later, the roar of that massive engine and the silhouette of those bent wings remain powerful symbols of one of the most legendary fighters ever to take to the sky. What if a bomber had to survive not just enemy fire, but pilots willing to crash straight into it over the skies of Japan? A lone B-29 faced wave after wave of fighters, outnumbered, outgunned, and already torn apart by two brutal ramming attacks. What happened next became one of the most unbelievable air battles of World War II. 14 enemy fighters destroyed by a single aircraft. Today we go back to that sky to witness the moment a legend was born. At exactly 11:42 a.m., January 27, 1945, Staff Sergeant Robert Chen huddled behind the central fire control station of a B-29 Superfortress call sign, Aquar 52. Outside, the world was nothing but blinding light and deadly cold. Oxygen frost crept across the plexiglass as the bomber climbed to 28,000 feet over the Pacific. Chen was 22 years old, 11 combat missions over Japan, 0 kills. And today, that was about to change. The formation climbed in silence until the intercom crackled to life. Bandits, multiple contacts climbing fast. Not a few, not a dozen. At least 40 Japanese fighters were rising to meet them. Chen tightened his grip. He wasn't behind a traditional gun. He was wired into 4 remote turrets across the bomber's body, each armed with twin .50 caliber machine guns. 8 barrels, all under his control. He had fired them before twice over Nagoya, once near the Japanese coast, but he had never seen an enemy plane fall. Not once. He was the youngest gunner in the 497th Bombardment Group. A kid, really. But up here, age didn't matter. Only reaction time did. Since November, the 73rd Bombardment Wing had been flying out of Saipan, and every mission followed the same brutal pattern climb to 28 to 30,000 feet, where the air was razor thin. The temperature dropped to 50 below zero, and jet stream winds tore at the bombers so violently, even experienced bombardiers struggled to aim. And every single time, the Japanese were waiting. By mid-January, 31 B-29s had been lost. 31. Not just aircraft, but 340 men gone. The worst came over Nagoya when 5 superfortresses were shot down in less than 20 minutes. No time to run. No time to regroup. Just fire and falling. American tank crews in Europe had learned what it meant to face superior machines like Panthers and Tigers. Now over Japan, B-29 crews were learning the same lesson. Altitude wasn't safety. It was just another battlefield. The enemy climbing toward them had a name, the Nakajima Ki 44. American intelligence called it Tojo. Japanese pilots called it Shoki Devil Queller. The name fit. It could reach 28,000 feet in under 8 minutes and carried either 4 heavy machine guns or 2 devastating 20mm cannons. Up here, where B-29 gunners fought frozen systems and oxygen-starved reflexes, a single fighter could attack again and again with terrifying freedom. But the worst part wasn't the guns. It was what came after. Starting in August 1944, Japanese pilots began ramming B-29s after expending their ammunition. Not ritual, not kamikaze doctrine. This was cold math. 1 fighter for 1 bomber. A trade. A B-29 cost $600,000 and carried 11 highly trained crewmen. To Japanese command, that was acceptable. The 47th Sentai near Tokyo had perfected the tactic deliberate collision. American intelligence believed they had already destroyed 3 B-29s this way, and crippled 7 more beyond repair. Inside Aquar 52, 6 tons of high explosives filled the bomb bay. The target was Tokyo's port facilities. Recon aircraft had reported clear skies, which meant visual bombing. And visual bombing meant no evasive action, no weaving, no escape. The formation had to fly straight and level perfect targets. At 0400 that morning, Chen had heard the numbers. 62 B-29s would go in. Intelligence predicted 9 wouldn't return. Up here at 28,000 feet, those weren't numbers. They were a countdown. Chen adjusted his sights as frost spread across the glass and the engines roared around him. Ahead, tiny black dots began to grow fast. 40 fighters, climbing, closing. This time, he wouldn't just fire. This time, he would see what happened next. If you want to find out how Robert Chen and his crew survived the storm of fire, waiting ahead, hit like and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more real untold World War II stories to life stories of courage, fear, and survival high above the battlefield. Back to Chen. The formation crossed the Japanese coast at 11:58, and radar stations on Honshu picked them up instantly. Within seconds, air raid sirens began to wail across Tokyo. At Narimasu Airfield, pilots sprinted toward fighters already rumbling on the runway engines, coughing smoke into the cold air. At exactly noon, the first Ki-44s lifted off and turned southeast, climbing hard toward the incoming bombers. 43 fighters. Aquar 52 was about to face more enemy aircraft than most B-29 crews would ever encounter in a single mission. The first one appeared at 12,000 yards. Chen caught it in his optical sight, a dark speck climbing fast, almost vertical, through broken clouds. The speck grew larger, wings took shape. Then the unmistakable outline of a Ki-44. The fighter rolled inverted at 27,000 feet and dove straight toward the lead bombers, with 3 more following close behind. Chen swung his upper forward turret into position, guiding weapons mounted 15 feet away through a remote system that adjusted automatically for speed, altitude, and forward motion. It was advanced technology for its time, but in 50 below zero temperatures, nothing worked perfectly. The lead Ki-44 opened fire at 800 yards. Tracers ripped through the sky toward the formation. Chen fired back instantly. His turret roared, sending .50 caliber rounds forward at nearly 2,800 feet per second. For a moment, the shot looked clean, but the fighter snapped left and disappeared beneath the formation. No hits. Gone in seconds. By 12:07, the sky had turned into chaos. Fighters attacked from every direction, high, low, left, and right. The standard tactic was fast and brutal. A high side pass from 11 o'clock, diving through the formation at 400 miles per hour, firing, then braking hard before the B-29 gunners could lock on. Most pilots avoided getting too close, but not all of them. Fighter 2 o'clock high came the call. Chen reacted instantly, swinging the turret toward a Ki-44, lining up for a beam attack at 700 yards. The fighter's nose was steady, tracking Aquar 52 with deadly precision. Chen led the target and fired a 3-second burst. Armor-piercing incendiary rounds cut across the fighter's path, and then the engine exploded. Black smoke burst from the cowling flames following as the aircraft flipped over and spiraled downward, trailing fire into the clouds. Chen's first confirmed kill. He didn't celebrate. There was no time. Two more fighters were already closing in. The right blister gunner opened fire, twin .5s hammering. The tail gunner called out another contact approaching from low 6 o'clock. Chen slaved the lower aft turret to his sight and fired, but missed. The tail gunner took over instantly, sending a tight burst into the key 44's wing root. The aircraft shuddered violently. Metal tore apart mid-air. The fighter dropped into a flat spin, pieces peeling away as it fell. Second kill credited to Aquar 52. At 12:19, the formation reached the initial point for the bomb run, the most dangerous moment of the entire mission. The bombers leveled out, flying straight and steady. No turns, no evasive action. For 6 long minutes, they would hold formation while bombardiers aligned their Norden bomb sights. 6 minutes of being perfect targets. The Japanese knew it. 14 Key 44s climbed above the formation, holding 3,000 feet higher. They circled once, then again, waiting, positioning, preparing for something bigger, something coordinated, an attack designed to break the formation apart for good. At 12:21, they rolled in. Chen counted them through his sight: 1, 2, 3, 4 fighters diving in pairs from 10 o'clock high and 2 o'clock high at the same time. Textbook tactics. The formation's gunners would have to split their fire, and each B-29 would be left exposed to multiple attackers. The first pair opened up at 1,000 yards. Chen locked onto the lead fighter and fired. His tracers merged with streams from 2 other bombers. The Key 44 flew straight into it. Its canopy shattered, the pilot lost control, and in a split second the fighter snap-rolled into its wingman. Both aircraft collided and disintegrated mid-air. Third and fourth kills, but the second pair had already slipped through the chaos. Now they were inside 500 yards, closing fast. Cannons flashing. Chen saw it instantly. One of them wasn't breaking off. No evasive move, no hesitation. The pilot had committed. A ramming run. 4 seconds to impact. Chen fired continuously, pouring rounds into the engine cowling. Sparks danced across the nose. The distance collapsed: 300 yards, 200, 100. Smoke trailed from the fighter, but it kept coming. At 12:22 p.m., it hit. The Key 44 slammed into Aquar 52's number 3 engine with a deafening metallic explosion. The propeller tore free. The bomber lurched violently to the right. The fighter's wings sheared off its fuselage, cartwheeling over the B-29 before vanishing into open sky. Debris rained across the aircraft. Warning lights exploded across the engineer's panel. Engine fire oil pressure failing. Within seconds, both right-side engines were shut down. Fire suppression engaged. Aquar 52 was now flying on just 2 engines. The bomber dropped out of formation, bleeding altitude at 300 feet per minute. Alone. Damaged. A perfect target. 3 Kai 44s broke away and dove toward it, holding the advantage in both speed and altitude. Standard doctrine was clear finish off crippled bombers before they could recover. Chen rotated his turret to meet the first attacker diving from 1 o'clock high. Range 1,000 yards and closing. He forced himself to wait. The targeting system needed time. 800 yards. The fighter opened fire. Cannon shells ripped through the left wing. Hydraulic fluid sprayed into the air. 600 yards. Chen fired a 4-second burst. The tracers connected. The canopy exploded. The fighter rolled away, breaking apart as it fell. Fifth kill. The second attacker came in low from 5 o'clock. The tail gunner engaged first twin .5s, firing non-stop. 6 seconds. No visible damage. The Ki 44 kept coming 400 yards. Then silence. The tail gunner was out of ammo. Chen took over, slaving the lower aft turret to his controls. The system lagged, hydraulics were failing. He adjusted manually, led the target, fired a short burst. Direct hit. The left wing folded upward, snapping clean off. The fighter tumbled end over end before breaking apart at 12,000 feet. Sixth kill. But the third attacker had used it all as a distraction. Now it was at 3 o'clock high, just 300 yards out, wings level, nose pointed straight at the cockpit. No gunfire, no tracers. The pilot was out of ammunition, another ramming attempt. The right blister gunner fired first. Rounds struck the engine, sparks flashing, but the fighter didn't flinch. Chen swung the upper turret hard right, pushing it to its mechanical limits. He fired, missed high, corrected, fired again, hit stitched across the fuselage. The Ki 44 shook, but stayed on course. 100 yards, 50, then impact. The fighter slammed into Aquar 52's #1 and engine. The propeller disintegrated instantly, shrapnel ripping through the wing. The fuel tank ruptured, gasoline sprayed into the slipstream. The Ki 44 tore itself apart on contact, its tail flipping over the cockpit, while the forward section smashed into the wing, ripping a 6-foot hole through the leading edge. Now the bomber had only one engine left. It was falling through 18,000 feet, airspeed dropping below 160 miles per hour, fuel leaking, hydraulics failing, control slipping away. And above them, 12 more Japanese fighters were already forming up, preparing for the third wave. Before we go on, tell me where you're watching from right now. Are you tuning in from the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, Germany, the Philippines, India, or somewhere else? Drop your country and your city, too, if you want, in the comments. I'd love to see how far this story is traveling. Chen's hands were numb. Inside the unpressurized gun station, the temperature had dropped to 62 below zero. His oxygen mask had frozen to his face, and ice crystals coated the optical sight. He wiped them away with a gloved thumb and forced his eyes back on target. Ahead, the remaining 12 Ki 44s split into 3 groups of 4 classic Wolfpack tactics. One group feinted high, another moved low, and the third waited to exploit any opening. Against a healthy B-29, it was dangerous. Against a crippled bomber with failing hydraulics and half its defenses gone, it was an execution. Aquar 52 dropped through 16,000 feet. The single remaining engine struggled against the drag of a torn wing. The aircraft commander ordered everything non-essential thrown out: ammo cans, toolkits, survival gear. Every pound meant a few more seconds in the air. Then the first group of 4 fighters dove from 12 o'clock high. Chen engaged at 900 yards. The turret moved sluggishly, hydraulic pressure down to 30%, but he fired anyway. The recoil shook the mount. Tracers climbed toward the lead fighter. It jinked right. Chen adjusted, fired again. This time the rounds tore into the left wing. Fabric ripped away. The structure gave out. The wing folded and the fighter rolled out of control. 7th kill. The other 3 pressed in, firing together from 600 yards. Cannon shells and machine gun rounds slammed into the bomber from multiple angles. The nose section took direct hits. Plexiglass exploded inward. Freezing air screamed through the fuselage. The bombardier was killed instantly by a 20mm round. Chen didn't look. He couldn't. He swung the turret toward the second fighter. The targeting computer was dead. Hydraulics had taken it with them. Now it was just instinct. 11 missions worth. He led the target and fired. The burst hit low sparks flashing across the fighter's belly. The Kai-44 broke hard left, trailing smoke. Probable kill. The third fighter came in closer, 400 yards, diving almost vertical. Chen held the trigger for 6 full seconds. The barrels overheated even in the frozen air. Tracers filled the sky. The Ki-44 flew straight into them. Hits tore into the engine. The propeller ceased spinning uselessly in the wind. The nose dropped. The fighter fell past the bomber's wing and vanished into the clouds. 8th confirmed kill. The 4th attacker struck from the side, 9 o'clock level. The left blister gunner opened up twin .5s flashing. The fighter jinked, then closed to 300 yards and fired a long cannon burst. The round shredded the left horizontal stabilizer. Control cables snapped. The bomber lurched violently. The rudder jammed hard left. The aircraft commander fought it, forcing opposite control, reducing power to keep them from spinning out. Chen tracked the fighter as it passed below, tried to bring the lower turret to bear, but the system locked. Hydraulics were gone. The tail gunner took over. His guns were mechanical, no hydraulics needed. He fired a short burst as the Kai-44 pulled up. The rounds hit the tail. The rudder tore free. The fighter spun, uncontrollably flattening out as it fell. 9th kill for Aquar-52. But there was no pause. The second wave of 4 fighters was already diving in from 2 o'clock high. The bomber was down to 14,000 feet, airspeed dropping 140 miles per hour, dangerously close to stall. One engine wasn't enough to keep them flying straight with a torn wing and jammed controls. Chen checked his ammo. 15 rounds left in the upper turret. The lower turrets were dead. The blister gunners were nearly dry. The tail gunner had maybe 60 rounds left. And 4 more fighters were closing fast. They split into 2 pairs. The first dove from above. The second held back, ready to strike from behind. Chen tracked the lead aircraft of the first pair 800 yards out. The turret jerked under his hands, hydraulic fluid leaking somewhere deep inside the aircraft. He steadied the sight, waited. 700 yards. Then he fired everything he had left. All 15 rounds in one burst. The tracers converged. Hits sparked across the fighter's engine cowling. Then the propeller shattered, metal fragments tearing away. The engine seized instantly. Smoke poured out as the Kai-44 rolled inverted and dropped away into open sky. 10th kill. The upper turret clicked empty. Chen's primary defensive position was gone. For a brief moment, there was nothing but wind screaming past the fuselage. Then he moved. He scrambled through the narrow tunnel toward the rear section, metal biting through his gloves, cold cutting into his bones. The right blister gunner was slumped over shrapnel, buried deep in his shoulder blood, frozen across his jacket. He couldn't fight. Chen took his position without hesitation. Another fighter was already diving 600 yards and closing fast. This time, there was no computer, no hydraulic assist, just muscle. Chen gripped the twin .50 caliber guns and forced them into position. The Kai-44 opened fire at 400 yards, cannon shells punching through the right wing. Chen led the target and fired. The recoil slammed into him as brass casings spilled away. His burst struck the cockpit. The canopy shattered. The fighter snap-rolled left and fell spinning out of control. 11th kill. But the second pair was already committed. Two fighters came in from 4 o'clock level 300 yards apart, firing as they closed. One aimed at the cockpit. The other targeted the wing route where fuel was already leaking. The tail gunner engaged the trailing aircraft, firing everything he had left in a 5-second burst. Tracers tore across the fighter's nose. The windscreen exploded. The Key 44 pulled up sharply, then disappeared into the clouds below. 12th kill. The lead fighter pressed in. Chen tried to bring his guns forward, but the angle was wrong. The blister position couldn't reach. He was blind. The left blister gunner stepped in, firing his last 30 rounds. The burst tore into the fighter's wing route. Fuel sprayed into the air. The Key 44 tried to break away, banking hard, but the damage was too severe. The wing snapped at the spar. The aircraft tumbled apart. 13th kill. 1 bomber, 1 crew, 13 fighters destroyed. But the count meant nothing. Aquar 52 was at 12,000 feet and still descending. The rudder was jammed. Control was barely possible. The wing was failing, and the final wave was coming. 4 more fighters approached, but this time they didn't dive. They formed up in a straight line behind the bomber, tight and deliberate. Chen understood instantly. Ramming attacks, 4 fighters, 4 impacts. Even one would be enough. They held position 2 miles back, matching speed and altitude, preparing for their final run. Chen stared through the blister window. He had no ammunition left. None. The tail gunner was empty. The turrets were dead. 4 fighters, 0 bullets. The lead Kai 44 broke formation and accelerated. 1 mile. It dipped slightly, building speed. The pilot of Aquar 52 tried to maneuver, but the jammed rudder limited everything. The bomber could only drift, unable to shake the attack. Half a mile. Now Chen could see everything: the dark green paint, the red Hinomaru, the yellow spinner marking it as part of the 47th Sentai. The fighter lined up perfectly with the tail. 15 seconds to impact. Then something changed. Black smoke began trailing from the fighter's engine, not from gunfire, but from within. The engine coughed, then seized. The propeller stopped. Silence. Without thrust, the Key 44 lost speed and dropped off its attack path. The pilot tried to restart, nothing. The fighter slipped beneath the bomber's tail and fell away into open sky. The ramming attack had failed, not because of bullets, because the machine gave out first. 14 fighters gone. And somehow Aquar 52 was still in the air. Before we continue, I want to ask you something personal. Did anyone in your family serve in World War II? A grandfather, great-grandfather, or relative whose story deserves to be remembered? Take a moment and share their name or story in the comments. I read them all, and it's one way we keep their legacy alive. Intelligence officers would later confirm the Key 44 had crashed into the Pacific 18 miles east of Tokyo, the pilot killed on impact. 14 confirmed kills, 1 bomber, 1 mission, the highest single mission total for any bomber crew in the Pacific theater. The remaining 3 fighters broke off their attacks as fuel reached critical levels, turning northwest toward Narimasu and climbing away. The engagement was over, but survival was not. At 12,000 feet over hostile territory, Aquar 52 was still dying. Chen crawled back through the connecting tunnel to the flight engineer, where the damage report came together piece by piece. Engine 1, destroyed engine. 3 destroyed engine 4, shut down, and only engine 2 still running, already overheating. The left wing was structurally compromised. The right wing leaking fuel hydraulics, barely functioning, and the rudder jammed. The bombardier was dead. The right blister gunner was critically wounded. Even navigation was compromised. The numbers were worse than the damage. Saipan was 1,500 miles away. 11 hours of flight time required, 9 hours of fuel remaining. The math didn't work. The flight engineer suggested a gamble: restart engine 4. It hadn't been destroyed, only shut down. Running it without proper oil would destroy it within minutes, but those minutes might increase speed and reduce fuel consumption. The aircraft commander approved. Engine 4 coughed, then caught running rough but producing thrust. The bomber accelerated to 170 miles per hour, just enough to stabilize and level off at 10,000 feet. For a moment, they were no longer falling, but they were alone. The formation had moved on. Bombs dropped, mission complete. Other B-29s were already turning back towards Saipan. Aquar 52 remained behind, damaged and isolated over the Pacific. Chen returned to the rear. The wounded gunner was fading, blood loss and shock setting in fast. He applied pressure bandages, but the morphine syrettes were frozen solid, useless. There would be no relief. The man stayed conscious, barely. 11 hours to Saipan, if they could even last that long. At 14:20, engine 4 failed 28 minutes after restart. The cylinders overheated, the engine seized, and the propeller stopped. The pilot feathered it immediately. Back to one engine. The aircraft began to sink again. 10,000 feet, 9,500, 9,000. One engine now carried 32 tons of damaged aircraft. The navigator recalculated. 7 hours of fuel left, 900 miles still to go. Still impossible. The flight engineer ordered the auxiliary bomb bay. Fuel tanks jettisoned 400 pounds of dead weight. They fell away at 14:45. The bomber climbed barely 100 feet. Fuel efficiency improved by 6 minutes. Still not enough. Chen stayed beside the wounded gunner. The bleeding had slowed, but the cold was taking over. In the unpressurized fuselage, temperature kept dropping. Chen made a decision. He removed his own heated flight suit liner, the only protection he had left, and wrapped it around the wounded man. The small electrical heating system still worked, powered independently from the failing aircraft. Heat for one man at the cost of another. Below them, the Pacific stretched endlessly. Above them, empty sky. And the numbers still said they shouldn't make it. At 1500 hours, the navigator offered a desperate alternative: Aoyama, 640 miles away. The island was still under Japanese control, but American submarines were known to surface nearby to rescue downed B-29 crews. If Aquar 52 could reach the waters around it and ditch successfully, there was a chance, small, uncertain, but a chance. The aircraft commander rejected it. Ditching a B-29 in open ocean carried barely a 40% survival rate. With both wings damaged and the rudder jammed, that number dropped even further. The aircraft would likely break apart on impact. And even if they survived, they would be floating in enemy-controlled waters with almost no survival gear. The decision was final. They would push for Saipan. At 1600 hours, Aquar 52 crossed the international dateline. The navigator marked their position 700 miles to go. Fuel for 5 hours and 40 minutes. The gap was closing, but not fast enough. The flight engineer began shutting down everything that wasn't essential, lights, instruments, heating, anything that drew power. Every system drained energy from the single working engine. Less load meant less strain. Less strain meant a few more miles. Inside the aircraft, the temperature dropped to -40 degrees. At 17:30, a formation of B-29s passed overhead at 18,000 feet. Tight formation, all 4 engines, running cruising at 270 miles per hour. They would reach Saipan in 4 hours. Below them, Aquar 52 struggled at 8,000 feet, barely making 160. Their estimated time was 7 hours. Fuel would last less than 5. The math still didn't work. The engine kept running, barely. Temperature deep in the red. Oil pressure unstable, sometimes dropping below safe limits. It was surviving on the edge of failure. At 2100 hours, the navigator spotted lights, a Navy destroyer 20 miles east, patrolling south of Iwo Jima. It couldn't help them, but it confirmed one thing: they were still on course. At 21:45, the fuel gauges read 30 minutes remaining. Distance to Saipan, 120 miles. Time needed 48 minutes. Still short, still impossible. The flight engineer made one final move. Every remaining drop of fuel, every tank, every reserve was redirected into the number 2 engine. Pumps engaged, valves opened, emergency systems activated, everything into one engine. The landing gear refused to deploy. Hydraulics were gone. The flight engineer grabbed the emergency hand crank. The nose gear dropped. The left main gear locked into place. The right gear stayed retracted, damaged beyond use. 1 mile out, at 1,000 feet, the engine finally died. Fuel exhausted. The propeller stopped turning. In that moment, Aquar 52 became a glider, 32 tons of damaged metal, falling toward the runway with no power and uneven landing gear. The pilot lined up the approach. Airspeed 130 miles per hour. Descent steep and fast. Too fast. They crossed the runway threshold at 300 feet, still too high. There was no chance to go around. The B-29 slammed down halfway along the runway at 110 miles per hour. The left gear collapsed instantly. The aircraft veered violently to the left. The wings struck the ground. Metal screamed against concrete. Sparks erupted beneath the fuselage. The bomber skidded more than 1,500 feet before sliding off the runway and grinding to a stop in the dirt. For a moment there was silence. Then the crew moved. The surviving men escaped through the rear hatch, 10 of them. The bombardier was gone. The right blister gunner gone. The aircraft itself was beyond saving, torn apart by damage too severe to repair. But it had done something extraordinary. Aquar 52 had flown 1,512 miles. On one engine, fought off wave after wave of attackers, shot down 14 enemy fighters in a single mission, survived 2 ramming attacks, and still brought 10 men home. If this story stayed with you, take a second to hit like so more people can see it. Subscribe and turn on notifications. If you haven't already, we're bringing real World War II stories back to life every day. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from, whether it's the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, or anywhere else in the world. And if someone in your family serves, share their story too. Because stories like this only survive if we remember them. What would you do if you were sent into the sky with just one wingman to face 60 enemy fighters, knowing your fuel might not even get you home? On October 24th, 1944. For one American pilot lived that nightmare, and what happened next became one of the most unbelievable dogfights in history, ending with his engine dying the exact second he landed. Today we bring you a story so intense, so unbelievable, it sounds almost impossible. At 7:30 October 24th, 1944, Commander David McCampbell swung himself into the cockpit of his F6F Hellcat on the deck of the USS Essex. The morning air was already tense. Then movement. A radar operator came sprinting across the flight deck, fast, urgent, no hesitation. This wasn't routine. This was bad. Very bad. McCampbell was 34 years old with 25 confirmed kills, the commander of Air Group 15, a man who had already seen too much war. But nothing like this. 60 aircraft inbound, fighters, dive bombers, all heading straight for the American carrier force east of the Philippines. 60. Minutes earlier, he had been in the ready room when the alarm shattered the silence. Now the war had found him again. The Battle of Leyte Gulf Day 1, the largest naval battle in modern history, was unfolding across hundreds of miles of ocean, and right now it was coming straight for them. Every available American aircraft was already airborne, being refueled, or too far away to help. On the deck of the Essex, only 7 Hellcats were ready, 7 against 60. The math didn't lie, and it wasn't kind. Standard doctrine called for a 3-to-1 advantage for the attacker. The Japanese didn't just have that, they had nearly 9-to-1 odds. McCampbell didn't need a briefing to understand what that meant. He had been losing men for months. 11 pilots gone in just 3 months. Not numbers, names, faces, voices. Lieutenant Morrison shot down over Formosa. Ensign Caldwell killed during the Manila strikes. Lieutenant Commander Harris missing after Taiwan. Gone, all of them. And McCampbell had written the letters. Every single one. Now the Japanese were coming again, throwing everything they had left, while the Americans were running out of experienced pilots to stop them. The Essex was exposed. The other carriers of Task Group 38.3 had already launched their patrols, but they were stretched thin across 60 miles of ocean. Too much space, not enough planes. McCampbell glanced down at his fuel gauge. Half full. Not enough time to top off. Not enough time for anything. Enemy formation 22 miles out. Closing fast. 200 knots. He did the math instantly. 6 minutes. That's all he had. 6 minutes before those bombers were in range. 6 minutes before flight decks turned into fire. His Hellcat was armed 6 .50 caliber Browning machine guns, 400 rounds each, 2,400 rounds total, enough to fight, not enough to waste. The Pratt and Whitney R2800 engine roared to life beneath him, 2,000 horsepower, shaking the aircraft alive and hungry. He looked across the deck, one Hellcat spinning up, then another, Lieutenant Rushing, Lieutenant Hayes, Lieutenant Johnson. 3 more pilots being rushed into position as ground crews moved with desperate speed. 7 planes, 7 men. Against 60, McCampbell tightened his grip on the controls. He was the air group commander. The decision was his. Send all 7 fighters straight into the formation, hit hard, hit fast. Try to break them before they reach the fleet. Or split the force cover. More angles, take more risks. The manual was clear: never divide your fighters when outnumbered. But the manual was written for situations that made sense. This wasn't one of them. The ocean stretched endlessly ahead. Somewhere out there, 60 enemy aircraft were coming fast, relentless, unstoppable. McCampbell took a slow breath. 6 minutes, 7 fighters. 1 decision, and no room for mistakes. If you were sitting in McCampbell's cockpit with the engine roaring beneath you, 6 minutes on the clock, 7 fighters at your back, and 60 enemy aircraft closing fast, would you charge straight in or risk everything on a split-second gamble? Tell me your choice in the comments, and if you want to see how this impossible moment turns into one of the most legendary air battles of World War II, hit like and subscribe. Back to McCampbell. The Japanese formation appeared on radar 60, contacts 40 fighters flying loose escort around 20 dive bombers. The bombers were the real threat. 1 bomb through the flight deck of the Essex could kill hundreds of men and cripple American air operations for months. But the fighters were the shield. Any Hellcat that went for the bombers first would be torn apart before getting close. McCampbell made his decision in seconds, just as his plane captain pulled the wheel chocks. He pointed at 5 pilots, then toward the southern quadrant. Go for the bombers. Then he tapped his own chest and looked at Rushing. The 2 of them would take the fighters. 2 Hellcats against 40 Zeros and Oscars. He released the brakes and pushed the throttle forward. The Hellcat surged down the deck and lifted into the humid air above the Philippine Sea. 30 seconds later, Rushing followed. They climbed hard, 3,000 feet, 6,000, 10,000. The enemy was 15 miles ahead and slightly below. McCampbell could see them now, dark specks against the blue water. 60 enemy aircraft, 2 American fighters. He armed his guns and checked his fuel again. Half tanks, maybe 90 minutes if he was careful. No room for error. He climbed higher, 15,000, 20,000 feet. Altitude meant speed. Speed meant survival. Below them, 12,000 feet down, the Japanese formation held steady, still driving toward the American carriers. Rushing slid into position 500 yards behind and to the right. Perfect spacing. A standard 2-plane element. They had practiced this again and again. 1 leader, 1 wingman attack, from altitude strike fast, then climb away. Below, the Japanese fighters circled their bombers, mostly Mitsubishi A6M0s, fast agile, deadly in a turn. McCampbell knew their strengths. At low altitude, they could outturn a Hellcat and outclimb it below 14,000 feet. But up here, the advantage shifted. The Hellcat was heavier, 2,000 pounds heavier, and in a dive that weight turned into speed. Speed became power. Power became lethal. McCampbell rolled into a 60-degree dive. The airspeed climbed 300 knots, 350, 400. The formation grew rapidly in his sights. He picked his target a 0, trailing slightly behind the group. Always the straggler. Always the weakest link. He centered it in his gun sight. 800 yards, 600, 400. The 0 pilot never looked up. McCampbell fired. 6.5 0 caliber machine guns roared. Tracers ripped through the sky. The Zero's wing disintegrated and the aircraft rolled into a deadly spiral toward the ocean far below. First kill. He pulled up hard. 4Gs crushed him into the seat. The Hellcat groaned but held. Back to altitude. Rushing was already there. His wingman had struck too. Another Zero destroyed. 2 down, 58 remaining. The Japanese formation shattered. Fighters scattered in every direction, diving, climbing, breaking apart. Their cohesion vanished in seconds. McCampbell chose his next target, a Zero climbing up toward him. A fatal mistake. At this altitude, the Hellcat had the advantage. He dove again. Same pattern, same result. The Zero exploded into flame fuel, igniting ammunition, detonating in violent bursts. No parachute. Second kill. Then the fight became rhythm. Dive, fire, climb, repeat. McCampbell moved through the formation with precision. Third kill at 07:52. Fourth at 07:56. Between passes, he checked his fuel. The needle was dropping fast. Climbing burned fuel. The main tank dropped to 1/4. He switched to the auxiliary tank. Rushing stayed tight, firing short controlled bursts, disciplined, efficient. At 0803, McCampbell claimed his 5th kill, a Nakajima Ki 43 Oscar, an Army fighter. Lighter, weaker, barely able to withstand the Hellcat's firepower. It came apart almost instantly. The Japanese were mixing Navy and Army aircraft, now clear signs of desperation. McCampbell lost track of time. Dive, fire, climb. His shoulder ached under the constant G-forces. Sweat soaked his flight suit despite the freezing air at 20,000 feet. The guns were heating up. He could smell cordite through his oxygen mask. 6th kill, 7th. Below him, the formation was gone. No structure, no coordination. Just scattered aircraft fleeing west toward Luzon. And McCampbell was still hunting. McCampbell glanced down at his ammunition counter, less than 400 rounds left. He had started with 2,400. In just 30 minutes, he had burned through over 2,000 rounds. Rushing's Hellcat slid up beside him. His wingman signaled, tapping his guns, then dragging a hand across his throat. Empty. Completely dry. No ammunition left. McCampbell understood instantly. Now came the decision. The smart move was to escort Rushing back to the Essex. Get him out. But the sky was still alive with enemy fighters, still a threat to the carriers, and McCampbell still had rounds left. Not many, but enough for maybe 2 more passes. He looked at Rushing, then pointed down toward another group of Zeros. Rushing nodded. No hesitation, no weapons, but still in the fight. They rolled into another dive together. 2 Hellcats, one armed, one empty. But to the enemy, they looked exactly the same. McCampbell selected his next target, a Zero climbing in a tight turn. This pilot was experienced. He spotted them early and reversed into a head-on merge, trying to force a turning fight where the lighter Zero had the advantage. McCampbell had seen it before Coral Sea, midway the Marianas. He didn't take the bait. Instead, he rolled inverted and pulled through. Negative G slammed him into his straps. Blood rushed to his head, vision narrowing. He completed the maneuver and came out directly behind the Zero. Perfect angle. 300 yards. He fired a short controlled burst, maybe 50 rounds. The Zero's cockpit shattered instantly. Plexiglass and metal exploded outward. The aircraft snapped sideways and dropped lifeless, spiraling down toward the ocean. 8th kill. Just one more to make history. McCampbell pulled back into a climb, but something felt wrong. The Hellcat was sluggish, heavy. The engine coughed, cylinder head temperature climbing into the red. He had been at full throttle for over 40 minutes. Even the rugged R2800 had limits, especially in the tropical heat at 20,000 feet. Then he saw it. 0840. A lone Zero heading west, running. The pilot had had enough. McCampbell rolled into his final dive. The Zero pilot spotted him and pushed down, trying to escape. The wrong move. Nothing the Japanese had could outdive a Hellcat. McCampbell closed fast 400 yards, 300, 200. He placed the gun sight on the engine cowling and squeezed the trigger. His last burst. Tracers walked up the fuselage. The engine seized. Black smoke poured out. The Zero pitched forward into a steep dive and vanished into the clouds below. 9th kill. 9 enemy aircraft destroyed in 90 minutes. A single mission record, one no other Navy pilot would match during the war. For the first time since takeoff, McCampbell reached for his radio. He keyed the mic and called the Essex, his voice calm, almost unreal after what had just happened. 9 confirmed kills. Silence. Then the radio operator came back unsure. Say again. McCampbell didn't hesitate. 9 confirmed. Where are you watching this from? Right now. Are you in the United States, Vietnam, the UK, Australia, Canada, or somewhere else? Drop your country and city in the comments. I read them all, and I'd love to see how far this story of McCampbell has reached across the world. He checked his fuel gauge, and for the first time that morning, David McCampbell felt a cold wave of fear. The main tank was empty, completely dry. The auxiliary barely showed an eighth. Maybe 20 gallons left. Maybe 30 minutes of flight time if he pulled the engine back and treated it gently. He looked up. To the west, the coastline of Luzon stretched across the horizon. That was where the Japanese were running. And that's when it hit him. He had chased them too far. Nearly 100 miles from the fleet. 100 miles out. 30 minutes of fuel. The math didn't work. He eased the throttle back to 1,800 revolutions per minute. The Hellcat shuddered, the powerful engine now forced into restraint after nearly an hour of full combat power, but it held barely. Rushing slid up beside him, signaling, pointing at his fuel gauge, then shaking his head. Empty. Both of them were now flying on fumes. McCampbell turned east immediately. No more fighting. Now it was about getting home. He held his altitude carefully. Every 1,000 feet meant about 2 miles of glide. He was at 18,000 feet, maybe 36 miles if the engine quit. He needed 60. Behind them, the Philippine coast faded into haze. Ahead, nothing but open ocean. Deep, cold water. Deadly water. He leaned the mixture, squeezing every last drop from the system. The needle touched empty. The engine coughed once, then again the aircraft shuddering violently before somehow stabilizing. It was running on vapor now, on whatever fuel remained in the lines. Then he saw it, the fleet. Tiny, gray shapes on the horizon, still 60 miles away. The engine coughed again at 50 miles. McCampbell switched tanks, nothing. Both tanks were dry. The engine note changed immediately. Rough, uneven, missing cylinders. The Hellcat was dying. He glanced left. Rushing was still there, but his aircraft looked worse. A thin white trail of vapor streaming behind him. His engine was breaking down faster. Too much strain. Too much time at full throttle. McCampbell dropped through 10,000 feet. Still 40 miles to go. Now the fleet was clearly visible carriers in formation surrounded by cruisers and destroyers, white wakes cutting through the ocean. So close and still so far. He pushed the nose down further. 8,000 feet, 7,000. Trading altitude for distance. Every second mattered. Then an explosion. A black puff of smoke burst ahead of him. Then another, American anti-aircraft fire. McCampbell's stomach dropped. The destroyers had picked them up 2 aircraft approaching from the west from Japanese territory. To them, these weren't friendly fighters, they were threats. His IFF should have identified him, but systems failed, signals got lost. Another shell burst closer, 100 yards. They were firing to kill. McCampbell reacted instantly. He shoved the stick forward and dove hard. The Hellcat plunged toward the ocean. Rushing followed. Both aircraft dropped fast, slicing through the air, losing thousands of feet in seconds. The heavy flak stopped, but McCampbell knew what came next. He had seen it before. The destroyers would report them unknown aircraft, wrong direction, and soon American fighters would be coming. This time, there would be no hesitation, and he had almost no fuel left to survive it. 4 Hellcats appeared at 2,000 feet, diving straight toward him, American fighters from VF-19 USS Lexington. They came in fast, tight, unmistakably hostile. McCampbell had no way to identify himself. His radio was locked on the Essex frequency, and he couldn't risk taking his hands off the controls. The distance closed fast, 1,000 yards, 800, 600. He could see their gun ports. The lead pilot was lining up the shot. McCampbell broke hard left. 4 Gs slammed into him. The engine coughed violently, nearly dying. The American fighter stayed with him, forcing him down toward the water. Off to his side, Rushing was in the same nightmare, 4 more Hellcats chasing him. 8 American fighters hunting 2 of their own. McCampbell's engine was barely alive, coughing constantly. He was 3 miles from the Essex, close enough to see aircraft on the deck. So close and still not safe. The fighters behind him closed to 400 yards, 300, then suddenly the lead fighter broke off. No warning, no explanation. One by one, the others peeled away. Rushing's pursuers did the same. The danger vanished as quickly as it came. Then the engine quit. 2 miles from the Essex. Complete power loss. The propeller spun uselessly. He was gliding now 120 knots, 1,000 feet of altitude. He did the math instantly. He wouldn't make it. Then he saw it, USS Langley off his right wing, smaller than the Essex, but her deck was clear.